Chapter 479. Lin Yuan returned Zhang Xiu's smile and said slowly, "As the head of the Secret Service, you are obviously not qualified. After all, the biggest difference between reasoning and facts is that one is imagination, while the other is evidence. Although my words are harsh, if you refuse to admit that you are innocent, do you think I can casually get rid of an important official of the Shenwu dynasty?" At this point, Lin Yuan raised his head slightly and continued, "It seems that your intelligence-gathering ability is also not up to standard. I originally wanted to cherish talents, but you are indeed not a talent. At best, you are better than an idiot. You can be considered an embroidered pillow." Currently, the northern frontier and the Shenwu dynasty were only one step away from war. Once the two sides started fighting, the barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty would not care about the attitude of the emperor above. After all, everyone knew that a general would not obey the emperor's orders. Therefore, when there was an opportunity, the barbarians would definitely not let go of the opportunity to loot a burning house. They would directly plunder the central plains of the Shenwu dynasty and the northern frontier without even paying a huge price. Therefore, the attitude of the Shenwu dynasty was actually very important to the northern frontier. Even if the cement was many times stronger than in the previous world, it was impossible to build a great wall that could resist the Shuangjian barbarian overnight. Once the Shenwu dynasty withdrew its main forces from the northern battlefield, Lin Yuan would instantly suffer heavy losses. Therefore, Lin Yuan had no choice but to cooperate with Lei Qiuxing and put on a show to lure Zhang Xiu into confessing. In fact, as long as Zhang Xiu insisted that he was innocent, Lin Yuan could not do anything to him. However, Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing had too much information together. Unless Zhang Xiu had already predicted this situation, otherwise, no matter how strong his psychological defense was, it would be torn apart and he would collapse directly. "Bastard, how dare you humiliate me?" Zhang Xiu's face flushed red, and he actually pounced forward, clearly intending to kill Lin Yuan. Although Lin Yuan had not fought for a long time, the Black Jiao, who was invincible, was too famous. Therefore, Zhang Xiu went all out the moment he attacked. Obviously, he wanted to take advantage of his surprise attack to kill Lin Yuan. He did not even think about exchanging blows with Lin Yuan. If that happened, he would only be dragged into a war of attrition by Lin Yuan, which was the domain of demonic beasts. Eunuch Tai, although this king agreed to help you investigate, he did not promise to clean up the aftermath. However, Lin Yuan did not evade, and even muttered casually, "As it should be." The deep voice sounded again. As the voice fell, a black shadow swept out from behind Lin Yuan. Although it moved later, it arrived first, and its speed was even faster than Zhang Xiu's. In just 2 breaths of time, the two had already collided, and their palms collided. The black shadow took 3 steps back, revealing a tall and sturdy body. Only his eyes were exposed to the air, and they were as emotionless as the iron mask on his face. He only lowered his head to look at his palm, and said indifferently, "A remnant of the previous dynasty, there is no need for the Dragon King to worry about it." The shadow side was calm, but Zhang Xiu was clearly not feeling so good. He took the palm of the number 1 expert of the Shenwu dynasty head-on, and immediately a large amount of blood spurted out. His entire body flew backward, but the force was not reduced at all. He once again landed steadily on the chair that he had personally dragged to the opposite side of Lin Yuan. His face was like a sheet of gold paper, and it was clear that the feeling of taking all of the shadow's force was not good. The 3 people present were all top experts in the same realm. Although Lin Yuan did not interfere, his eyesight was not bad at all. After Zhang Xiu took the shadow's palm, his right hand had already turned into a pile of mush, and he could vaguely see the remnants of his bones in the minced flesh. The muscles of his arm had also exploded, his bones were broken, and his meridians were all broken. Even his internal organs were severely damaged. If there were no elixirs, Zhang Xiu would probably die in another 7 or 8 breaths of time. It was clear that this eunuch Tai, who was a man of few words, was even more terrifying than Lin Yuan had imagined. Just based on the strength that could kill Zhang Xiu with a single palm, it was no wonder that Yan Xingqi would rather waste his time in the northern frontier than go to the imperial capital to seek revenge for his exile. Not counting existences above the Kongming realm, among all the creatures that Lin Yuan had seen, perhaps only the Beast Lord Kirin could contend with this eunuch Tai. Another existence that had walked the path of the Kongming realm to the extreme. Unfortunately, he did not have enough opportunities and had never been able to step through that door, nor had he been able to see the true appearance of this world. Farewell. After dealing with Zhang Xiu, this hidden danger, eunuch Tai clearly had no intention of chatting with Lin Yuan. He only cupped his fists towards Lin Yuan, then turned and walked out. Lin Yuan's mind was full of thoughts, but in the end he still gave up on that tempting idea. At eunuch Tai's level of cultivation, the so-called power and wealth were no longer attractive to him. However, the opportunity to go further was as fatally attractive as a poppy. However, Lin Yuan did not have any cultivation methods above the Kongming realm. Secondly, eunuch Tai was a trusted aide of Lei Qiusheng. Although he did not know the relationship between the two, it was certainly not worse than that of a brother. Would eunuch Tai not admit it after eating it clean? Now that the war was about to start, Lin Yuan did not want to personally create a more powerful enemy for himself. After confirming with the Eye of God that eunuch Tai had left, Lin Yuan let out a long sigh of relief. He walked over to Zhang Xiu, who had closed his eyes and was waiting for death. He straightened his body and said faintly, "I can save you." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Xiu instantly opened his eyes, revealing a glimmer of light in them. Previously, with eunuch Tai watching from the side, it was impossible for Lin Yuan to protect him even if he wanted to. However, now eunuch Tai was clearly extremely confident in his own abilities. After suppressing Zhang Xiu with one palm, he left him here to wait for death. This gave him a chance of survival. After all, Lin Yuan's name had always been tied to miracles. Since Lin Yuan had spoken, then there must be a way to save him. But are you willing to be my dog? In the next moment, Lin Yuan's voice made Zhang Xiu feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. As the crown prince of the Wanjian dynasty, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards and the Ether Association, Zhang Xiu had always been above everyone else. When he heard that Lin Yuan wanted him to be his lackey, Zhang Xiu subconsciously wanted to refuse. However, the pain in his body constantly reminded Zhang Xiu that he had lost everything. Regardless of whether it was the remnants of the Jiao clan that he had used as his foundation, or the embroidered uniform guards and the Ether Association that he had painstakingly built, they had all become clouds of the past. Even he himself was now a person waiting for death. In addition, more than half of the 7 to 8 breaths of time had passed. He could only nod with difficulty. After all, with his status, it was difficult for him to say that he was willing to be someone's dog. Chapter 480. The moment Zhang Xiu nodded, Lin Yuan bit his neck. Before he completely lost consciousness, Zhang Xiu could feel that Lin Yuan had stuffed something into his mouth. There was also a vague sentence, "But I'm not sure what kind of monster you will become." If Zhang Xiu could still open his mouth to speak, he would definitely curse a few words, but after Lin Yuan stuffed something into his mouth and turned it into a medicinal liquid and flowed into his stomach, Zhang Xiu completely lost consciousness and did not even have the chance to curse. About 4 hours passed. Lin Yuan was still sitting on the cushion, staring blankly at Zhang Xiu, who was sitting on the chair. He didn't know if Zhang Xiu was dead or alive. At this moment, Zhang Xiu slowly opened his eyes. What was revealed was not the original pair of black and white eyes, but a pair of dark green vertical pupils that were like gemstones. The skin on the surface of his body was also rapidly changing. The originally pale skin quickly cracked and a large amount of black liquid flowed out from the wounds. After the wounds healed, the original skin had been completely shed. What replaced it was a body of pitch-black scales that were as black as ink. Zhang Xiu looked down at his own changes in a daze. Before he could react in surprise, he saw that his hands had turned into sharp claws covered in ferocious black scales. He opened his mouth to ask what was going on, but only made a series of meaningless hissing sounds. You still retain your rationality. It seems that the transformation was successful, although you still can't escape the fate of becoming a monster. Lin Yuan was not surprised at all. Instead, he looked at Zhang Xiu's current appearance with interest and smiled. Your current appearance is more suitable for your personality. You are more like a poisonous snake than a human. Zhang Xiu held his forehead. Whether it was cursing or crying, it was extremely difficult for him to do. After all, his current body was too unfamiliar to him. Even the simple act of raising his hand to support his forehead took a lot of effort. With a thought from Lin Yuan, Zhang Xiu immediately felt the blood in his body begin to flow and boil, followed by a heart-wrenching pain. Although he did not fall to the ground, even with Zhang Xiu's patience, he could not help but tremble slightly at this moment. This king has granted you a new life and a new body. Naturally, he will not let you do as you wish. This time, consider it a greeting. But remember what this king will say next. What flows in your body is not blood, but the venom of this king. As long as this king wills it, even if we are in two different worlds, he can easily take your life. At this point, Lin Yuan's face suddenly revealed a faint smile. He whispered, "In addition, your current appearance is too different from a human's. Take some time to learn how to speak again. This king will have a task for you." However, although this king is not a mediocre master who will kill his subordinates if they make a mistake, he does not have much patience for a poisonous snake like you. You only have one chance to make a mistake, so you can either choose to die together with this king, or you can choose to work for this king honestly. Hiss hiss. Zhang Xiu opened his mouth and let out a few more hisses. A long snake tongue came out of his mouth. Dark green saliva dripped down the snake's head and onto the floor under his feet. Immediately, fist-sized holes were corroded, and white smoke constantly rose from them. Feeling the earth-shaking changes in his body, Zhang Xiu really wanted to cry but had no tears. The reason he was willing to agree to be Lin Yuan's dog was mainly because he still had too many unfinished things to do. He also had a deep obsession with that position. He originally wanted to agree to be Lin Yuan's dog for a period of time and wait until he was fully grown before pulling him out to do it alone. Although he might not succeed, at least he would be more popular than Lin Yuan, who was born a monster. However, Lin Yuan clearly took care of his little thoughts. Not only did he turn him into this inhuman and ghostly appearance, he even put a terrifying restriction on him. Because Zhang Xiu had fallen into a death trap because of a mistake, he had become even more cautious. With the addition of the restriction on his body, Zhang Xiu sadly discovered that he actually no longer had any thoughts of rebelling against Lin Yuan. Glancing at Zhang Xiu, Lin Yuan changed his previous attitude and said in a deep voice, "However, you don't have to feel like you have suffered a great loss. The so-called imperial family is nothing more than the strongest family in the dynasty. What imperial bloodline? It's just a trick to control people's hearts. Whoever believes it is a fool. Moreover, even if I don't interfere, all your plans will proceed smoothly. Do you really think that those so-called officials of the previous dynasty will be willing to assist you, the crown prince of a fallen country?" At the mention of this topic, Zhang Xiu suddenly raised his head. His dark green eyes suddenly revealed a fierce glint. Although the remnants of the Jiao family were almost completely uprooted, there were still many officials of the previous dynasty in the Shenwu dynasty. Once these people were gathered together, they would be a force that even Lei Qiusheng would have a headache over. However, Lei Qiusheng did not have a powerful weapon like the Northern Frontier Academy in his hands. He could only absorb talents from various families and sections. Although he had cultivated many poor children, the quality was uneven. They could not do anything important and their official careers were bleak. In addition, these officials of the previous dynasty were originally part of the aristocratic families. Even if Lei Qiusheng wanted to get rid of these officials, he could not do it. After all, he did not want his dynasty to lose control and cause more violent rebellions. Originally, Zhang Xiu could still support the support of these officials of the previous dynasty. However, now that things had turned out like this, who would still admit that he was the crown prince of the Wanjian dynasty? He thought about how he had controlled the embroidered guard for so many years, sheltering these officials from the previous dynasty from the wind and rain. He even did not hesitate to suppress his political enemies for them so that they could support his ascension to the throne. However, with Lin Yuan's interference, all of this had disappeared. How could he not hate him, Look at your unconvinced look. That's why I said that you are just an embroidered pillow. Lin Yuan shook his head helplessly and said with a smile, back then, your Jiao family controlled 70% of the country's military power. Lei Qiusheng was able to usurp the throne. Although he did not kill all of you, he still forced you to the bitter cold northern frontier. You had to rely on the support of the monster court to survive. It's fine if you don't admit it. However, the so-called remnants of the Jiao family, other than having a name, are they comparable to any aristocratic family in terms of strength? This time, Zhang Xiu did not even hiss. He could only remain silent. After all, Lin Yuan was speaking the truth. After tens of years, the influence and power of the Jiao family had been weakened to the extreme, and no one would take the Jiao family seriously anymore because their power was getting worse day by day, and even some medium-sized families had surpassed the Jiao family in power. Chapter 481. If you knew how to speak, you would refute me at this time. Your Jiao family still has influence. After all, you are the legitimate royal family. As long as you can kill Lei Qiusheng, the traitor, you can win the hearts of the people and rebuild the Wanjian dynasty. As he spoke, Lin Yuan's voice became teasing again. However, Zhang Xiu seemed to not see the teasing in Lin Yuan's voice and nodded seriously. Clearly, from Zhang Xiu's point of view, this was the case. Yes, I admit that once Lei Qiusheng dies, those old officials of the previous dynasty will quickly lift you up and let you, the legitimate crown prince, become the new emperor. But what difference is there between an emperor like that and a puppet? Your Jiao family's strength is weak. So what if you become the emperor? Don't you still need someone to speak up for you so that you can make decisions? If no one speaks up for you, then what? Right now, all the powers in the Shenwu dynasty are against Lei Qiusheng. Because Lei Qiusheng is indulging me now, he wants to learn my methods of reforming the northern frontier and then reform the entire Shenwu dynasty. Therefore, even though they are already against Lei Qiusheng, they still have to obediently listen to his orders. Because Lei Qiusheng holds military power in his hands and has great prestige, as long as he is angry and raises his arm, the Shenwu dynasty, from the generals to the soldiers, will raise their blades against the aristocratic families and sections. Even those nobles who are developing towards aristocratic families will not take the risk of offending Lei Qiusheng and join the aristocratic families. The reason is that the Lei Qiusheng has power that they are afraid of. Just like how this king was able to destroy these aristocratic families and sects because he held an absolute advantage in the northern frontier. If you ascend the throne and don't have the power to make the aristocratic families fear you, those officials will respect you on the surface, but behind your back, they will not take your orders seriously. You can only watch as they do whatever they want. Lin Yuan shook his head and said, according to your original plan, the best result is that you will be a puppet emperor for the rest of your life. Even your sons and grandsons will become puppet-like emperors. In the future, those factions of the previous dynasty will be wiped out by a ruthless person. When all the powers are tied together, it will be the end of your Jiao family. At that time, another existence similar to Lei Qiusheng will be born. Hearing this, Zhang Xiu's eyes showed a hint of contemplation. An emperor without power was a puppet. This was an indisputable fact for all the feudal dynasties. It did not matter if the ones controlling the court were vassals, relatives, civil and military officials, or even eunuchs. There was no difference. Anyone could hold power. But once an emperor became a puppet, unless there was a resurgence and a large number of capable royalists, no one would return power to the emperor. After all, everything that they or their ancestors had done in the past would be brought out and dealt with one by one. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiu regained some of his calmness. His hatred for Lin Yuan was no longer strong. Sensing the change in Zhang Xiu's emotions, Lin Yuan smiled warmly and said, of course, it's still the same as before. The so-called emperor is only the most powerful of the aristocratic families. Now on the northern frontier, the so-called emperor is not even worth mentioning. This is because everyone under the influence of this king has clearly understood two things. The power of the monarchy is bestowed by God, and the king is under the law. If this king is alive, this king has the final say. If this king is dead, the laws of the northern frontier will have the final say. No one is allowed to overstep this. But this king will still allow the aristocratic families to exist. At this point, Zhang Xiu's interest was piqued. Although Lin Yuan had called him an embroidered pillow, Zhang Xiu had been in charge of forces like the Embroidered Guard and the Ether Society for so many years. Even if Zhang Xiu was not outstanding, the experience he had accumulated was enough to make him a one-in-a-million talent. Although the northern frontier already had Sherdong and Luo Su, the two spy masters, Zhang Xiu knew very well that since Lin Yuan had saved him, he would definitely be of use to him. This king can take over the north, but he can't take over the entire Shenwu dynasty. Otherwise, it will definitely lead to the counterattack of the other 6 dynasties. Seeing that Zhang Xiu was in high spirits, Lin Yuan raised his voice and said, "So this king needs a name. The former Jiao clan can be used as this king's name. This king can help you with the matter of restoring the Wanjian dynasty. But I think you should know the conditions, right?" Zhang Xiu nodded heavily once again. How the king of the northern frontier, who ruled the northern frontier, would be how the emperor of the Wanjian dynasty would be in the future. But since Lin Yuan had put it this way, it was useless even if he did not cooperate. This was because he was not the only Jiao clan. If he was unwilling to do this, there would naturally be others willing to do it. Moreover, it was not without benefits to become Lin Yuan's puppet. For example, the current king of the northern frontier, Li Zhong, was a saintly figure in the eyes of the northern frontier people. Even if Lin Yuan wanted to touch Li Zhong, he would have to think twice. So Zhang Xiu could not be bothered to be pretentious. Instead, he looked at Lin Yuan with a face full of anticipation, waiting for Lin Yuan to paint a picture of the future for him. Of course, this king's subordinates have never been stingy. What should be given will not be given less. As long as you are obedient and do not scheme for things that you should not want, naturally everything is negotiable. Every year, 40% of the income of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce will be given to you in the form of tribute. But this resource cannot be put into the national treasury, but directly into your palace treasury. Lin Yuan looked into Zhang Xiu's eyes and slowly threw out his first bait. As expected, Zhang Xiu's eyes shone brightly. After all, Lin Yuan's actions were equivalent to giving the Jiao clan money and food, allowing the Jiao clan to raise an army and increase the strength of the clan. Perhaps in the future, when the Jiao clan's strength was completely accumulated, they could really sit on the throne of the emperor. But very quickly, a look of worry appeared in Zhang Xiu's eyes. He said vaguely, "Lord Dragon King, it's easy for you to say. But the example of Lei Fan and Hu Yen is still fresh in my mind. This emperor, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to be emperor, right?" Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he understood the meaning of those words. He laughed coldly and said, "Lei Fan died because he wanted to monopolize power. Hu Yen lost because he stood on the wrong side. As long as you don't cross my bottom line, I will not touch you. If the northern frontier wants to change a new king, I only need to nod my head and the Shenwu dynasty can issue an edict. But if you want to change the emperor, it must be agreed by all the aristocratic families and the people. If you don't give me a reason, I will naturally not touch you." Zhang Xiu nodded slightly, indicating that this was the truth. "Alright, this king is tired. Go find Li Zhong and take him to a courtyard to rest. After a period of time, there will be another task for you." Lin Yuan had also lost interest in talking at this moment. He waved his tail expressionlessly. Chapter 482. North of Shenwu Dynasty, under Wei River City. Li Zhongxing was riding on a warhorse with bright red hair. He gazed at the majestic city that was like a nail stuck in the northern territory. His eyes blinked slightly, and an indescribable complex expression emerged in his eyes. That was the last city that needed to be taken down to unify the entire north. According to the current progress, he and his southern expedition would arrive at the city in 7 days. If we take down the city, the only ones in the north that have the strength to threaten the northern frontier are those barbaric barbarians. Li Zhongxing's right hand that was holding the sword tightened, and the complex expression in his eyes became more and more intense. Wei River City wasn't a city for people to live in, but a complete fortress camp. Other than the elite soldiers selected from each army, only Shen Lin-jun, who had been trained since childhood, was stationed in the city. Now, Shen Lin-jun's main force in the city was still in the south, and those elite soldiers were also on the expedition. It was estimated that there were at most 300,000 reserve soldiers in the city at this moment. But the funny thing was that Li Zhongxing, who now had more than 10 million soldiers, didn't dare to say that he had more than a 40% chance of winning when facing that isolated island-like majestic city. That was Shen Lin-jun, the most elite army in the entire Shenwu dynasty. It was the face and the trump card of the dynasty. It was a legend that had never lost a battle. Even if they were just reserves, these quasi-warriors of the Divine Forest Army had either cultivated the imperial family's cultivation techniques since they were young or were carefully selected elites from various troops. They were loyal, brave, and never cowered from battle. As the smallest troop in the Shenwu dynasty's army, they enjoyed the best treatment. 70% of the Shenwu dynasty's annual military expenditure was spent on the Divine Forest Army. The supply of phase and the quality of the cultivation techniques were something that even the so-called top aristocratic family's descendants would be jealous of. Stop looking. That piece of hard bone is not for you to eat. Gao Buzhen, who was wearing silver armor, rode his horse over and stood next to Li Zhongxing. A cold light flashed in his eyes. We, the Fallen Star Army, never let others take care of our grudges. Your battlefield is further north. Li Zhongxing pursed his lips. It was a taboo to change a commander in battle, so Lin Yuan did not plan to change him at all. Instead, when the sweeping work in the north was coming to an end, apart from the various branches that were still cleaning up the rebel army, he transferred Li Zhongxing and his main forces to the vicinity of Donglin City, ready to strike at the Shuangjian barbarian who was preparing to invade the border at any time. As the most important part of the plan to sweep the north, the battle for Wei River City was directly handed over to Gao Finjin. He planned to let this former champion take the bank of Wei River and establish a military position against the Shenwu dynasty. Although Li Zhongxing had known that this day would come, he had never thought that it would not be the Northern Army that would replace him, but the Fallen Star Army with only 5,000 people. He admitted that the Fallen Star Army was one of the famous strong armies. Even though Gao Finjin only had 5,000 people, he had to pay a great price to take them down. However, the Fallen Star Army dozens of years ago was totally different from the Fallen Star Army today. Li Zhongxing would not be surprised if Gao Finjin led the Fallen Star Army to fight against Shen Lin-jun decades ago. After all, they were at the same level. But the Fallen Star Army today? 5,000 people were not even enough to fill the gap between Wei River City's teeth. However, he did have the idea of leading the army across the river to the Shenwu dynasty, and the closer he was to the imperial capital, the stronger this idea was. If he were to be the commander of the entire army, he might be the first traitor to change sides at the last minute. Therefore, Li Zhongxing did not feel strange at all about Lin Yuan's decision to transfer him away. In other words, it would be strange if Lin Yuan continued to put him here. Thinking of this, Li Zhongxing came to himself. He moved his lips and said, "General Gao, now all the families and sects in the northern frontier have been wiped out by the Dragon King. Although the northern frontier is important, it doesn't need all the soldiers of the Northern Army to defend it. Instead of wasting manpower, why don't you and I write a joint letter to remove the soldiers of Shen Lin-jun from the Northern Army and transfer a troop to help us?" Gao Finjin glanced at Li Zhongxing with a touch of surprise in his eyes. He snorted, "The Dragon King has his own plan." While they were talking, a blood-red firework suddenly exploded in the sky in the distance. Li Zhongxing and Gao Finjin's faces changed. Li Zhongxing's face turned cold. He gritted his teeth and said, "Crazy!" As the red firework with the highest warning priority in the intelligence system of the northern frontier, it was not something that could be set off by just anyone. Besides, the direction of the firework was almost the northernmost part of the northern frontier. Both of them were excellent generals, so they knew that the soldiers of the Shenwu dynasty in the north had opened the defense line and let the Shuangjian barbarian invade the northern territory. Li Zhongxing frowned and thought for a moment. He said with a gloomy face, "I'm afraid it's not that person's idea." It should be that the nobles of the northern frontier used some unknown method to guess that person's intention. They didn't want to see our northern frontier become stronger, so they opened the defense line in advance to let the barbarians come over and disgust us. Gao Finjin smiled bitterly. He just waved his hand and said bitterly, "This is just your speculation. But we still have to think of the worst. We can't rule out the possibility that Lei Qiusheng wants to transfer our main force and then send out the reserves in Weha City to wipe out the rebels and the nobles. So this time, I won't accompany you. I'll stay here and watch over Weha City." Li Zhongsheng's lips trembled, but he didn't say anything. He just cupped his fist at Gao Finjin and rode back to the camp. It's good to be young. Looking at Li Zhongsheng's back, the corners of Gao Finjin's mouth rose slightly. As veterans of the Fallen Star Army, they knew very well that Lei Qiusheng, who was sitting on the throne, had taken the same path as the Dragon King of the northern region when he first rose to power. He didn't care about the process or the infamy. As long as he could achieve his goal, he wouldn't even frown even if he had to send all of his trusted subordinates into a battlefield where they couldn't win. Therefore, although Lei Qiusheng was the general with the most victories in the Myriad Swords dynasty back then, his soldiers' elimination rate was also the highest. Letting the Shuangjian barbarian into the northern frontier would indeed hurt Lei Qiusheng's face. It would even cause him to lose a large amount of territory in the northern frontier. It would also be difficult to eliminate these Shuangjian barbarian afterwards. But this was indeed in line with Lei Qiusheng's methods. As long as he could win, nothing else mattered. After all, although the northern frontier now belonged to the Shenwu dynasty in name, the real ruler was Lin Yuan. Even if these Shuangjian barbarians were released, the one who would have a headache was Lin Yuan, not him. Chapter 483. On the other side. In the prince's estate on the northern frontier, Lin Yuan, Li Zhong, Luo Su, Sherdong, and Zhang Xiu sat in the meeting hall, but they were strangely silent. Only a fool would let the barbarians enter the pass now. After all, there's only the Wei River between the north and the south. The place where the barbarians are now is the source of the Wei River. With the strength of the warhorses they ride, they can easily cross the source of the river where the water flows the slowest and head straight for the southern territory of the Shenwu dynasty. It's hard to say who will be cut down by this saber. Zhang Xiu reached out to touch his scaly chin. There seemed to be a ball of fire burning in his eyes. If the embroidered guard's intelligence network in the north was still effective, and if the secret memorials from various places could be accurately delivered to Lei Qiusheng's desk, then even if the old general who nominally controlled nearly half of the country's army was willing, Lei Qiusheng would not agree to such a foolish decision. Thus, regardless of whether Zhang Xiu admitted to this or not, it could only mean one thing: the embroidered guard was gone. We can't rule out another possibility. Sherdong had changed his attire. His hairstyle was somewhat similar to the Thunder Devil hairstyle Lin Yuan had in his previous life. His hair was tied into small braids, and he was not wearing clothes made of cloth or silk. Instead, he was wearing a leather jacket with wool embroidered on it. He even had a mustache that was almost impossible to tell if it was real or fake. His skin color had also been partially altered, making him look like he was often baptized by the wind and sand on the grasslands. If it were not for the fact that everyone present was familiar with Sherdong, they would have thought that the Shuangjin barbarian had already charged into the northern frontier. At this moment, Sherdong was clearly much calmer. He said in a deep voice, "The Shenwu dynasty might have already reached some sort of agreement with the Shuangjin barbarian to have these barbarians point their scimitars at us instead of crossing the Wei River to attack the Shenwu dynasty's southern territory." However, Zhang Xiu shook his head and said, "I don't believe it. Everyone knows that the northern frontier is bitterly cold. Even the entire north is like this. According to the character of those barbarians, once they enter the border, the first thing they do is to go down south and plunder those rich and populous lands, instead of fighting head-on with the northern frontier people, whose folk customs are not inferior to the Frost Mirror herdsmen's." As someone who had been in charge of the Northern Intelligence Agency for many years, Zhang Xiu knew these barbarians very well. On horseback, these barbarians were as vicious and cunning as a pack of ferocious wolves. It could even be said that they had no match for them on flat ground. Other than a few armies that could fight them head-on, the rest of the armies and civilians were like sheep waiting to be slaughtered in their eyes. But at the same time, apart from the wolf-like nature that was engraved in their bones, they could not fight head-on. Once they suffered too many losses, they would be like dogs that were afraid of being beaten. They would shrink back and lick their wounds with their tails between their legs. It was impossible for these barbarians to insist on attacking the north when they knew that it was not easy to provoke them. This was not to say that the barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty had no guts. After all, a real coward without guts would never become one of the 7 dynasties and train a cavalry that could dominate the world. The reason why the barbarians acted like wolves and hounds was because their country was much more chaotic than the other dynasties. Although they were known as the Shuangjian dynasty, they were still divided into tribes and tribes. Only the leader of the strongest tribe could become the Frost Mirror Khagan, who nominally ruled over all the tribes in the Frost Mirror Grassland, similar to the monsters in the Hengduan mountain range. However, even the Frost Mirror Khagan did not have much control over the tribes under his command. At the very least, if the Beast King Kirin gave the order, the entire Hengduan mountain range would enter a period of bloody cleansing. Countless monsters were trembling in fear and did not dare to fight against the Beast King Kirin. However, if the Frost Mirror Khagan disobeyed the will of the tribes under his command too much, the grassland would be thrown into chaos. By then, all the tribes would be slaughtered until a new Khagan was elected. The cattle and sheep of the loser would become the spoils of war, the wives and daughters of the loser would become the playthings of others, the young would become slaves, and the old would be slaughtered. Even the powerful Frost Mirror Khagan would be eaten by the wolves when he was weakened. Under such circumstances, even the bravest warrior would think twice about losing too much of his strength. Would the tribe he was from become the prey of other tribes? In terms of fighting strength and bravery, the cavalry of the Shuangjian dynasty was the best in the world. However, in such a decentralized system, they had become a constraint to themselves. Therefore, even though the other 6 dynasties were not as strong as the Shuangjian dynasty in terms of national strength, they could still scornfully call them barbarians. Then let's make these barbarians believe that the northern frontier is now richer than the south, and that the army of the northern frontier is far inferior to the elite warriors of the Shenwu dynasty. As long as we can fulfill these 2 requirements, the barbarians, who are used to bullying the weak and fearing the strong, will treat the north as a delicious lamb and eagerly come to eat us. Shi Dong spoke once again in a powerful and resonant voice. He was originally ordered to go into hiding in the Shuangjian dynasty. However, before he could set off, the barbarians had already invaded the north. This forced him to give up on his plan and order the members of the Association of the Demon Emperor hiding in the Shuangjian dynasty to go into hibernation. However, Shi Dong had done the preparatory work perfectly. Even compared to Zhang Xiu, a veteran spy, Shi Dong could say that he understood the Shuangjian barbarian better. After all, he was prepared to take the risk and carry out the undercover work himself. He was completely different from Zhang Xiu, who was passively defending. Therefore, his intelligence work was more comprehensive and accurate. How is that possible? Zhang Xiu's green eyes fell on Shi Dong's face. He sneered and said, "Don't tell me you're saying that the Shuangjian dynasty has also established an intelligence agency similar to ours. That's why they know the northern frontier like the back of their hand? If the barbarians had such brains, the Frost Mirror Grassland wouldn't be in such a situation. The barbarians indeed can't establish an intelligence agency. If they really have one, it would save us a lot of trouble. Everyone knows that our northern frontier is currently preparing our troops and eyeing the Shenwu dynasty's southern territories covetously. Look at the Shenwu dynasty's side. They are in a quagmire of war. Their troops have suffered heavy losses and have no way to replenish them. If they can't come up with a solution, they won't even be able to pay the officials next year, let alone the soldiers." Li Zhong rolled up his sleeves and said with a gloomy face, "The barbarians know very well that the northern frontier is prosperous because our Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is also doing business in their territory. Although there aren't many tribes that are cooperating with us, those tribes are living a much better life. Given the barbarians' character, they will naturally think that as long as they can rob the northern frontier, they will be able to solve the problem once and for all. They won't need to pay a large number of livestock or fees to take the goods in our hands. Chapter 484. I admit that this makes sense, but how do you explain who's the pushover and who's the tough nut to crack? Zhang Xiu panted heavily. It was obvious that he had lost his mind. In the past, even Lei Qiusheng had to listen to his advice. But now that he had joined the northern frontier, not only did he no longer have the Embroidered Guard or the Ether Association to help him, even Sherdong and Luo Su, who he used to look down on, could now argue with him face to face. Under such a huge disparity, even the most talented person would lose their mind for a moment, let alone Zhang Xiu, who had been called an embroidered pillow by Lin Yuan. Therefore, after Li Zhong also stood on Sherdong's side, Zhang Xiu's mentality had completely lost its balance. He instinctively thought that the old subordinates of the northern frontier were rejecting him, an outsider, and worried that he would take away power from the Embroidered Guard and the Shifter Emperor Association. Isn't that even simpler? Li Zhong sneered and said indifferently, "What are your old subordinates doing? I don't believe that after such a long time, the current troop deployment of our northern frontier and southern expedition, as well as the map of the territory defenses, have not been sent to Frostcon. At the same time, they only need to blur the troop deployment and the state of the Shenwu dynasty's treasury, and they'll naturally make the barbarians think that we're pushovers." At this point, Li Zhong slowly stood up from his seat and said in a strange tone, "After all, it's the Shenwu dynasty's troops that have blocked the barbarians outside the northern pass for such a long time, not our northern frontier's troops. What if Lei Qiusheng promises the barbarians that as long as the barbarians return the territory that was taken from them, he will give the north to the barbarians as a racetrack?" This, Zhang Xiu was speechless. Although he still wanted to struggle, he also realized something. Lin Yuan, the true ruler of the northern frontier, had not spoken yet. Even if they said everything, it would be useless. When Lin Yuan made his own decision, they could only follow it unconditionally. Therefore, if he objected now for the sake of objecting, it would only lower his evaluation of himself in Lin Yuan's heart, and his position in the future would also be lower. That's not very likely. Luo Su, who had also remained silent, rubbed his face with his bandaged hands and said coldly, "The Hengduan mountain range is vast, but there are also many monster tribes living there. In addition, most of the monsters have strong reproductive abilities and short growth cycles, so it's impossible to raise all the monsters in this area. Every year, there will be a lot of monster hordes. However, with Lord Dragon King in charge of the northern frontier, the monster hordes that were supposed to attack us have been diverted to other directions. This is why the northern frontier seems to be safe now." Here, Luo Su paused and smiled. No matter how stupid that Frost Mirror Khan is, to be able to become the Wolf King, he must be either the strongest or the smartest of the pack. He must have realized that conquering the north of the Shenwu dynasty can still be as comforting as we are in the northern frontier. This is equivalent to helping Lei Qiusheng protect the rich south and also helping them to block the monsters in the Hengduan mountain range. Fighting on two fronts for a long time will only weaken them while the Shenwu dynasty grows stronger. When the time comes, not only will the Shuangjin dynasty not get any benefits, but their own territory will also be devoured and they will become the watchdogs of the Shenwu dynasty. Luo Su did not choose a side. Instead, he stood in a relatively fair position and expressed his opinion. So, however, Li Zhong frowned slightly and asked in confusion, "The barbarians of the Reflection Frost dynasty don't want to exterminate us. Instead, they want us to become like crops in their fields. Every year, they'll come and plunder us, but they want us to continue developing? This is the wisdom of the Wolf King." Luo Su nodded slightly and sneered. "Lei Qiusheng can't wait for the Shuangjin dynasty to conquer the north, but Frost Mirror Khan won't agree. This war is inevitable, but we won't lose from the beginning. Because even if we lose, we will only suffer losses, but we won't perish because of this. Even if Lei Qiusheng interrogates us, the Shuangjin barbarian will most likely stand on our side and send troops to attack the Shenwu dynasty's borders. They will become our protectors." Li Zhong pondered for a moment. Finally, the tangled mess in his mind was completely unraveled. He sneered, "How can there be such a good thing?" With Li Zhong's wisdom, he had figured out the cause and effect. The Shenwu dynasty wanted to use the barbarians to destroy them. Even if they couldn't, they wanted to hit them as hard as possible and make the northern frontier weaker than the south. However, Frost Mirror Khan was obviously not a brute. Not only did he not want to fall into Lei Qiusheng's trap, but he also wanted to take advantage of Lei Qiusheng and take control of the northern frontier, which nominally belonged to the Shenwu dynasty. However, no matter what the two emperors were scheming, the northern region seemed to be the weaker party in their eyes. They deserved to be schemed against and even eaten into their stomachs. From the beginning to the end, the two emperors had never taken the northern region seriously. They thought that the northern region was only qualified to be eaten alive. Although Li Zhong was not the actual ruler of the northern frontier, as the king of the northern frontier, Li Zhong still had his dignity. Moreover, Li Zhong himself was a talented national scholar. Although the northern frontier was not as strong as the Shenwu dynasty, there was no mess to clean up. All in all, they were on par with each other. If Lei Qiusheng still took control of the northern frontier, he would probably go back and hang himself with a white silk. Indeed, it's not that easy. Finally, Lin Yuan, who had been silent with his eyes closed, opened his mouth. Only then did everyone realize that the Black Water Dragon King had been listening to their opinions instead of sleeping on the soft cushion. According to the original plan, we'll leave the barbarians alone. We'll let them win all the way, but don't let them taste the sweetness. We'll even let them think that the northern frontier is really weak and easy to bully. We'll whet their appetite and let them go deep into the hinterland of the northern frontier. Then, we'll let Li Zhongsheng send out the main forces to eat up all the barbarians who dare to step into our territory. Lin Yuan opened his different-colored eyes and glanced coldly at Luo Su. He said in a cold voice, "Mobilize your imperial guard. If more than 2,000 barbarians escape, you and Li Zhongsheng can just wait to die." Luo Su stood up, cupped his fists at Lin Yuan, and strode out of the meeting hall. As someone who treated Lin Yuan as a life-saving medicine, Luo Su could clearly feel Lin Yuan's will. This Dragon King, who had dealt with all changes by sticking to the status quo and only set out for war when everything was ready. Moreover, he wanted to eat up the entire north in one go, was really angry this time. Chapter 485. And you, Sherdong. Lin Yuan's gaze shifted again, his killing intent raging as he coldly said, "Tell those little bastards under you that after the main forces of the barbarians are defeated, it will be your turn to reap the fruits of the battle. If you can't wipe out those defeated and deserters, you'll have a taste of your own medicine. This king won't take your life or disband the association of the Demon Emperor, but don't even think about messing with Luo Su in the future. Just be his lackey." Sir Sherdong shuddered, and his expression suddenly became serious. As an official in the prosperous northern frontier, even the most strong-willed person would inevitably make mistakes. Even if they didn't dare to touch the fat meat that belonged to His Excellency the Dragon King, it wouldn't be a problem for them to suck the oil off their hands. However, these were things that could be used against them, and they were in the hands of the embroidered uniform guards and the association of the Demon Emperor. Therefore, once Sherdong and Luo Su fell out, these northern frontier officials would have no choice but to take sides and express their support. When the time came, both sides would throw out the dirty information in their hands, and it was hard to say how many people in the northern frontier would lose their heads. During this period of time, he had been fighting openly and covertly with Luo Su. For example, in order to monopolize the credit for suppressing the aristocratic families, he couldn't even share the information in his hands with Luo Su. This caused Luo Su to resort to many dirty and underhanded methods, causing the reputation of the embroidered uniform guards to worsen. Although it was to his liking, this Dragon King was clearly unhappy. Li Zhong. After Sherdong also bid farewell and left, Lin Yuan's gaze fell on Li Zhong. "Sir." Li Zhong quickly lowered his head, not daring to look Lin Yuan in the eye. This was because he suddenly realized he had made a huge mistake. Although this mistake was something to be happy about for most rulers, It was clearly impossible for such a good opportunity to fall from the sky. However, because of the matter with the barbarians, he had neglected the great situation on the battlefield and ruined the arrangements Lin Yuan had painstakingly made. Whether there would be another such opportunity in the future was not even up to Lin Yuan and him to decide. This king scram to the side and face the wall. This king finds you an eyesore. As expected, after Li Zhong agreed, Lin Yuan's roar suddenly sounded. Li Zhong shrunk his neck and obediently walked to the wall. After the evil fire in his heart had mostly dissipated, Lin Yuan cast his gaze on Zhang Xiu's face that was covered in black scales. Zhang Xiu also stood up straight and looked at Lin Yuan with a face full of anticipation. After all, he was a newly surrendered general who had just joined Lin Yuan's side. He did not have any contributions to the northern frontier. Moreover, the small actions he had taken to protect the development of the northern frontier were firstly for his own selfish reasons, and secondly, it was not convenient to talk about them. Therefore, Zhang Xiu believed that as long as he became one of the meritorious officials of the northern frontier, he could at least guarantee his future position, even if these old subordinates did not reject him. Go look for Gao Buzhen. He will arrange for you to go to the south. Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes overflowed with a cold light as he said in an incomparably ruthless manner, "Since that old thing Lei Qiusheng dared to do such a thing, then no wonder this king wants to do the same. I believe that with your understanding of the south, you can better arrange for those evil cultists and know where to use them to cause the greatest damage." Zhang Xiu's expression changed slightly, and he almost cursed out loud, but he quickly adjusted his posture. What kind of monsters were these two people that he had been serving ever since he had hidden his identity? One did not hesitate to sacrifice his territory in the north and his own face to brazenly lead the barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty to invade. The other made corresponding arrangements in the south, preparing to lead the evil cultists who had been expelled to the isolated islands overseas with great difficulty back to the mainland. After all, although the north was vast, it was mostly mountainous, and there were not many places suitable for horses to run and raise. Even if the barbarians took over the north, when they realized that this meat was of little value, they would naturally withdraw from the north. At that time, whether or not they could retreat unscathed would depend on the recovery of the Shenwu dynasty. But those evil cultists? They were like weeds. As the saying went, even if a wildfire could not burn them out, they would grow again when the wind blew. Once this group of evil cultists entered a densely populated area, they would be like fish in water. In less than half a month, they could turn a group of simple and honest people into murderers who would sacrifice themselves for those unknown evil gods. When that time came, the south would inevitably be even more chaotic than it was now. There might not even be a way to uproot these evil cultists even until death. After all, although the previous expulsion of the evil cultists seemed to have gone smoothly, the various forces had secretly prepared for hundreds of years in order to succeed. This was nothing more than inviting trouble to oneself. However, Zhang Xiu did not know whether Lei Qiusheng had the ability to completely wipe out the cultists. At this time, it was not good to say much. He could only swallow this bitter fruit. After all, Lin Yuan was right. This was the result of Lei Qiusheng's actions. As long as the barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty did not enter the territory of the north, the evil cultists of the south would not strike. Both sides had placed a time bomb beside each other, but no one knew when this time bomb would detonate. Therefore, they could only remain in a stalemate and wait for both sides to be ready to fight. Zhang Xiu was very clear that no matter how well he did this task, he was destined to leave behind a bad name in the future. Obviously, this Black Water Dragon King was not a magnanimous person. Previously, when the remnants of the Jiao clan pretended to be members of the Association of the Demon Emperor and wanted to conquer Shunning City for the demon beasts, it was to nail the Association of the Demon Emperor to the pillar of shame. Now that Lin Yuan asked him to be in charge of the evil cultists, it was tantamount to nailing him to the pillar of shame. In the future, no matter what attitude Zhang Xiu had towards Lin Yuan would always be able to grab hold of his weakness. Once this scandal was exposed, not to mention restoring the Myriad Swords dynasty, Even the remnants of the Jiao clan who had successfully restored their country would not be able to tolerate him. Although Zhang Xiu had accepted the task, he was still standing in the same place. Lin Yuan moved his body, his head almost touching Zhang Xiu's face, and said coldly, "Why? Are you not willing to do this task?" Lin Yuan's voice exploded in his ears like spring thunder. Only then did Zhang Xiu wake up from his inner struggle. He could only clasp his fists at Lin Yuan awkwardly, and then quickly leave the meeting hall. So be it if you want to be a dog. In any case, he had already become like this, neither human nor ghost. Why would he care so much? If he did not complete Lin Yuan's task well, he naturally did not need to think about what would happen to him in the future, because he would not have a future. After everyone left, Li Zhong trembled and turned his head to look at Lin Yuan with an extremely ugly expression. Chapter 486. Do you think you are very humorous? Lin Yuan glanced at the trembling Li Zhong and narrowed his eyes. He said coldly, "This king created an opportunity for you, but you chose to stand on Sherdong's side? Do you really want Zhang Xiu to think that you old subordinates of the northern frontier are suppressing him? I really didn't realize it before, but after thinking it through, I still believe that I did the right thing." Li Zhong was stunned for a moment before he slowly said, "However, Zhang Xiu is a very wild person. If we don't suppress him, he will definitely think that he can sit back and enjoy the northern frontier. However, if I cooperate with Sherdong to expose this matter, Zhang Xiu will definitely feel a sense of danger. As such, no matter what mission the Dragon King gives him, he can only do his best to complete it. Otherwise, according to his habitual thinking, he will probably think that we old people of the northern frontier will not give him a place to stay. However, if you use a gentler method, you can still achieve your goal. You can even make Zhang Xiu feel grateful to you." Lin Yuan's eyes were still narrowed as he slowly said, "You must know that a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. The embroidered uniform guard is far more powerful than the association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard that we temporarily established. In a mere northern frontier, we naturally have the advantage. However, after leaving the northern frontier, they don't have much of a chance of winning against the embroidered uniform guard." Lin Yuan paused. Even if the embroidered uniform guard has changed masters, with Zhang Xiu's personality, he will definitely have a backup plan. At the very least, the people he placed in the northern frontier before his identity was exposed are absolutely loyal to him. These people are the backup plan he left for himself. Even a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows, let alone a venomous snake like Zhang Xiu. No matter how Zhang Xiu performed in front of Lin Yuan, no one would lower their guard against him, even if he was just an embroidered pillow. After all, this guy had great willpower and ambition to change his appearance and hide by Lei Qiusheng's side. He was even able to contend with Lei Qiusheng for such a long time and obtain such great authority. This was enough to make many so-called ambitious people blush with shame. Even though Lin Yuan was used to being in a superior position, he still didn't have the confidence to control Zhang Xiu. Therefore, when he fed him the dragonization root, he also injected his own curse poison into Zhang Xiu's body to restrict him. If Zhang Xiu and his lackeys could become Li Zhong's support, they would be the third spy force between the Council of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guards. The triangle was the most stable. When the time came, the 3 sides would suppress and balance each other. Only then would Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne of the northern frontier, be stable. He wouldn't be directly pushed down from the throne of the northern frontier by Sherdong and Luo Su's combined efforts. However, Li Zhong had missed the opportunity to be gentle with Zhang Xiu. He was even secretly standing on the opposite side of Zhang Xiu. This was the reason why Lin Yuan was so angry. Li Zhong shook his head disapprovingly and said with a smile, "Dragon King's foresight is something your student can't match. However, the Dragon King is too kind to the people around him. This is a great weakness. Dragon King wishes for me to be benevolent and virtuous, but have you considered your own situation? There are no 2 suns in the sky. Your student uses benevolence to win people's hearts. The Dragon King uses martial prowess to deter the world. It sounds like a good idea, But has the Dragon King considered how we should interact in the future? When your student's wings are fully grown, even if your student is willing to bow down to you, those people under your banner will not agree. Lin Yuan was silent. He didn't know how to refute Li Zhong. In this life, he was born as a demonic beast. To him, this was his greatest weakness. As long as the humans and demonic beasts in the Sky Martial Continent didn't make peace and share the world, then Lin Yuan could only be the king behind the scenes. Lei Fan, Hu Yen, Li Zhong, they were all faces that Lin Yuan had nurtured in this sick environment. However, the greatest drawback of doing this was time. Even if he was a puppet, after being in this position for a long time, he would become the true king in the hearts of others. When his wings were fully grown, there would definitely be a battle between the two sides. It was just that the time of the battle would be sooner or later. Unless by that time, Lin Yuan had already unified the Sky Martial Continent and solved the problem of the Heaven's Gate. Otherwise, it would always be a tragedy where those close to him would feel pain and those close to him would feel joy. Let's talk about Zhang Xiu again. Li Zhong's expression turned solemn and changed from his previous trembling appearance. He gritted his teeth and said, "He is a poisonous snake. In terms of conciliation, I don't think anyone has done a better job than Lei Qiusheng." He promoted him from a lowly position and treated him as a trusted aide. He gave him the control of the embroidered uniform guards and the Ether Society, which were in the shadows but could affect the entire empire. However, what was the result? Has Zhang Xiu ever been loyal to Lei Qiusheng? Li Zhong gently shook his head and sneered. The best way to deal with this kind of poisonous snake is to suppress it, push it aside, and let it live in eternal fear. Let it feel that it will lose everything if it makes a small mistake. This way, Zhang Xiu can be of help to us instead of nurturing a tiger that will only invite calamity. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment. Then he slowly opened his eyes and said helplessly, "All right, you've convinced me. Go about your business." When he finished speaking, Lin Yuan's figure had already faded and disappeared from the meeting hall. It was only at this moment that a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on Li Zhong's forehead. The corners of his mouth trembled slightly and he squeezed out a bitter smile. When working by the side of the Dragon King, he had to always remember the saying, "Being by the side of the Emperor is like being by the side of a tiger." An opportunity or a problem could be a test given by the Dragon King. If he passed the test, everything would be fine. However, if he went against the intentions of the Dragon King, Lei Fan and Hu Yen were bloody precedents. Although Li Zhong did not know whether Zhang Xiu's matter was an opportunity or a test for him, his rationality reminded him that if he wanted to live a long life as the king of the northern frontier, he should never stand in the way of Lin Yuan. He should not have any thoughts that he should not have. As for the nonsense of replacing him, it was all because of his greed. Once he took that step, no matter how intelligent he was, he would not have a good ending. Therefore, from the initial mistake to the subsequent determination, Li Zhong had always maintained a certain attitude, to reject Zhang Xiu's participation. Luo Su and Sherdong could become partners, but Zhang Xiu could not. This poisonous snake's ambition was too great. Even if he became a role like the king of the northern frontier and obtained enough authority, he would still not understand what it meant to be content. He would not accept the existence of a retired emperor above him. When the time was right, he would overestimate himself and challenge Lin Yuan's authority. Then he would be smashed into pieces. Being associated with such a person, even if he did not participate in some matters, the best outcome would be to be implicated. Chapter 487. North of the Shenwu dynasty, Donglin City. Li Zhongxing was dressed in golden armor and had a scarlet cloak draped over his back. He stepped on the city wall with one foot and looked at the frost mirror cavalry that roared past like tigers and wolves. Cold sweat slowly seeped out of his forehead. These Shuangjin barbarian soldiers had changed their previous style of destroying everything they passed by and marched uniformly toward the northern frontier. It was as if Donglin City and other cities that still belonged to the Shenwu dynasty did not exist. They did not even pretend to attack. They even took a detour around the almost defenseless farms and villages outside the city. Seeing this scene, Li Zhongxing's hope for that man was once again shattered. The Shuangjian barbarian soldiers' style of action was obviously because they had reached an agreement with some people from the Shenwu dynasty. Their only goal this time was the northern frontier. Although that person was trying his best to protect the cities and people in the north, he did not seem to know that the Shuangjian barbarian soldiers loved to repeat their actions and did not hesitate to push the entire north into a pit of fire. After struggling for a while, he finally sighed faintly and said in a clear voice, "The craftsmen and materials prepared by your highness have already entered Donglin City, right? Although we're not sure when the barbarians will come, it's better to be prepared than to be suddenly attacked." When the higher-ups made the decision, they had already put it into action. 60% of the craftsmen and all the materials have now been transported to Donglin City and the nearby cities. Although the number of craftsmen did not meet the requirements, we can still complete the project on time by putting some of our soldiers into the construction of the Great Wall project. Standing next to Li Zhongxing was a middle-aged warlord who was as burly as a bear. He was also dressed in golden armor, but there was more worry in his eyes than Li Zhongxing's. Obviously, he had not been baptized by the flames of war and was very nervous in the face of such a battle. Put. Li Zhongxing gently patted the general's shoulder and said with a chuckle, "There's nothing to be nervous about. Don't be fooled by how arrogant these barbarians are now. Once our plan is carried out step by step, they'll have to leave all their men and horses behind in the north. Are you afraid of a group of people who are about to die?" He remembered the middle-aged general's name, Qiao Yu. Although his surname was Qiao, he had nothing to do with the Qiao family of the northern frontier. He was a true civilian of the northern frontier, and his ancestors had all been honest farmers for 10 generations. Although he was fortunate enough to be selected as one of the first students of the Northern Frontier Academy, Li Zhongxing had been a lecturer at the Northern Frontier Academy for 2 days, so he had a deep impression of this ridiculously sturdy fellow. However, they encountered such a large-scale war before they even graduated. It even involved 2 dynasties. Nobody knew if it was a blessing or a curse for the first batch of students. Just then, a white carrier pigeon descended from the sky and landed accurately on Li Zhongxing's shoulder. Li Zhongxing first took off a small cloth bag from his waist and fed the carrier pigeon a piece of jerky. Then, he reached out to take off the small wooden bucket tied to the carrier pigeon's leg, removed the cork, and poured out the letter inside. After glancing at the numbers on the letter, his face turned gloomier. According to the information sent back by the members of the Association of the Demon Emperor from the front lines, there were as many as 500,000 barbarians invading the north this time. It was said that Shuang Jianhan's 13th son had entered the northern frontier some time ago and lost contact with the Shuangjian dynasty's army. Therefore, Shuang Jianhan had even sent out 3 blood Liao knights to join this expedition, saying that they would find his son even if they had to dig 3 feet into the ground. In addition to the barbarians who had entered the northern territory, there were also 700,000 barbarian soldiers who had crossed the Wei River from the source where the river flowed gently. They were now heading straight for the central plains of the Shenwu dynasty. Although these barbarians had verbally reached an agreement with the Shenwu dynasty, they obviously had no intention of letting go of the rich south after entering the pass. Li Zhongxing pondered for a moment before taking a pen and paper from a guard and writing, "The barbarians' movements are of utmost importance. You must send someone to follow the barbarian cavalry and report the situation every 30 minutes. If there is no response after 30 minutes, you will consider them as having died in battle. Send someone else to follow the barbarian cavalry." Of course, Li Zhongxing also used code words. Although the birds that sent the letter were all demonic beasts, there was no lack of people with high cultivation among the barbarians. Moreover, one had to be skilled in archery and riding to make a living on the grassland. These birds were very easy to kill by the barbarians. Using code words to communicate was also to prevent the information from leaking out. He threw the order back into the small wooden bucket and tied it to the carrier pigeon's leg. With a light shake of his shoulder, the carrier pigeon suddenly flew into the sky. Li Zhongxing measured the situation on the city wall for a moment, then pointed to the west and said in a deep voice, Although these barbarians won't act until they see the hair, it'll be difficult for them to continue chasing if they don't get any benefits. We have to stimulate their courage. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Yu, who was beside him, took a deep breath and growled, "Marshal Li, the troops in Donglin City are ready. As soon as you give the order, we'll take a shortcut and run in front of the barbarians. Will King ambush them first?" Smith. Li Zhongxing patted Xiao Yu's head again and said angrily, "Big Black Bear, when will you grow some brains? What are our identities now? We're the generals guarding the city of the Shenwu dynasty. If we run to the front and ambush these barbarians, won't we ruin the Dragon King's plans if they come around and stop chasing us?" Then, Xiao Yu's face froze, and he asked carefully. Li Zhongxing shook the scarlet cape behind him and sneered, "We'll go out and scout. We'll wipe out small groups of barbarians when we encounter them. After making sure that there are no barbarian cavalry nearby, we'll let the craftsmen and brothers come out to work. A bunch of ignorant fools. Do you think you can escape unscathed after entering my territory?" Li Zhongxing had seen the horror of cement with his own eyes. A bag of powder-like substance was turned into moldable paste with water. After being molded and air-dried for about 10 minutes, it immediately became a hard stone that was invulnerable to weapons, water, and fire. With the craftsmanship of the current northern frontier, even an all-out attack from an airborne realm cultivator with infinite strength would only leave a shallow mark on the cement wall. With this divine item in hand, Li Zhongxing was confident that he could build a high wall that would make the barbarians despair at first sight within 5 days as long as no one interfered. Xiao Yu scratched his head in confusion and said, "But isn't this our job to begin with? Marshal Li, you said that we need to stimulate the courage of these barbarians. Do you think we'll just let them ride on their horses like this?" Chapter 488. That's not our job. Li Zhongxing's eagle-like eyes narrowed slightly as he sneered. "Don't forget that we're the Southern Expedition Army. At most, we're only responsible for annihilating the defeated barbarians. If we stand out too much, what will our brothers do? Freeloaders?" Xiao Yu's brain, which had grown muscles, turned quickly for a while before he exclaimed, "Commander Li, are you saying, other than them, who else is qualified to fight against the barbarian cavalry in the wild?" Li Zhongxing laughed self-mockingly and said sourly, "Other than the 5,000 Fallen Star Army, the Southern Expedition and the Northern Battlefront Army might be famous, but if we were to fight against the barbarian cavalry in the wild, we would only have a slim chance of survival. The northern frontier used to be so proud and arrogant. They didn't even bother to build the perfect fortifications in the 7 border cities that the Shenwu dynasty had built for many years. Instead, they directly tore down the city walls and divided the settlements. First of all, the demon beasts in the Hengduan Mountains could come out at any time and wipe out all the armed forces that didn't obey Lin Yuan. Second of all, it was because Lin Yuan had never taken the heavy infantry army of the Shenwu dynasty seriously. Although the heavy infantry army of the Shenwu dynasty was no weaker than the Frost Mirror cavalry, they were much more mobile. Once the two sides clashed, the Frost Mirror cavalry might not even be able to shake the formation of the Shenwu dynasty's heavy infantry army, but the Shenwu dynasty's heavy infantry army could quickly bypass the Shenwu dynasty's heavy infantry army and attack other troops. Even if they couldn't find the weakness of the Shenwu dynasty's heavy infantry army, they could easily leave the Shenwu dynasty's heavy infantry army behind and attack other cities. It was not that the northern frontier was afraid of the Frost Mirror cavalry in a head-on battle. It was just that the territory of the northern frontier was too vast. If they didn't fortify the city walls, they couldn't defend against the Frost Mirror cavalry's attacks. Therefore, they had to use Donglin City as the center and connect the nearby cities to form a strong pass without any natural barriers. This was the biggest investment in history. Everyone knew that the northern frontier was very cold, but few people knew that the amount of resources the Shenwu dynasty invested in the defense of the 7 border cities every year was enough to stun the aristocratic families in the south who fought each other for a sea trade route. In other words, if Lei Qiuxing hadn't combined the memories of his previous life to come up with a substitute for cement in this life, Even if Lin Yuan owned a gold-swallowing beast called the Chamber of Commerce of the Northern Region, he wouldn't have been able to afford such a terrifying expense. Otherwise, Lei Qiuxing wouldn't have used the barbarians of the Mirror Frost Dynasty as a killing move against Lin Yuan's weak spot. It was just that this stab was too fast and too sudden. If it weren't for the fact that the northern region was now full of heroes and had realized this early on, the Mirror Frost Dynasty and the Shenwu Dynasty might have succeeded. On the other side, Xiao En, who was wearing a brown warrior's robe, was squatting on the trunk of a giant tree. He narrowed his eyes and put an arrow made of crimson steel mastiff's bones on the bowstring. He slowly pulled the bowstring and adjusted his breathing. His voice echoed in the forest like the wind. Ready, fire. Bush, bush, bush. Thousands of sharp arrows suddenly flew out from the dense forest, like a black cloud surging out. Before the cavalry of Frost Mirror who were approaching from afar could react, the group of people at the front had been shot into sieves and fell into pools of blood. Don't panic! Don't panic! A general of Frost Mirror pulled on the reins and glanced at the casualties. He said fiercely, "There aren't many of them, only about 2,000 or 3,000. Rush over and eat them. Tell these bastards what's the matter, warriors of the grasslands. All Kiliarchs, move forward in a roundabout way. Archers, take out your bows and suppress the enemy." This general was obviously a veteran of the battlefield. With just a cursory glance at the casualties, he was able to deduce the number of archers who had suddenly launched an attack on them. However, before the experienced general could finish his sentence, another black cloud surged out of the forest and shot down another 300 Frost Mirror cavalrymen. There were even a few unlucky Blood Liao cavalrymen among them. Many of them were terrified by this sudden turn of events. The tribe that Frost Mirror Khan belonged to was the Shui Liao tribe. Therefore, this extravagant cavalry was like the personal guards of the Frost Mirror royal family. Whether it was food, clothing, or armor, they were far superior to the other troops of the Shuangjian dynasty. If it were them, their bows and arrows might not be able to penetrate the armor of the Shui Liao knights. Unless they were lucky enough to hit an exposed part of the armor, such as the face, the number of arrows would not be enough to cause any effective damage. But look at the arrows that were shot out. The arrows would instantly pierce through the leather armor of ordinary cavalry. The arrows would also instantly pierce through the secret metal armor of the Shui Liao knights. The armor of their warriors was like a piece of paper, without any defensive ability at all. It was as if they were wrapped in a layer of paper. The general gritted his teeth and roared, "Brothers, if you're scared now and turn around to run, you'll still be shot for nothing. Who knows who will be the next unlucky ones to die? Draw your bows and return fire." We have 70 to 80,000 people on this road. Do you think we'll be scared away by a few thousand soldiers? Cover fire. Let the brothers of the assault cavalry charge in and kill these bastards. As soon as the general finished speaking, the Frost Mirror cavalrymen were somewhat reluctant, but they still quickly drew their bows and arrows. Feeling the wind around them, they aimed at the dense forest in front of them. Every one of them looked particularly ferocious as they gritted their teeth. After all, living on the cruel grassland, even a gust of cold wind could freeze people to death. If one's clothes were not tightly wrapped enough, it was not uncommon for parts of one's body to freeze off. Therefore, the Frost Mirror tribe rarely migrated after occupying suitable grassland. Even if a strong enemy came knocking on their door, they would choose to fight to the death. Otherwise, the number of people who died of diseases and cold in Lusang would be more than those who died in battle. To the Frost Mirror tribe, reputation was like an umbrella. If a powerful warrior appeared in a tribe, even a tribe more powerful than them would have to be polite to him. They had just entered the Shenwu dynasty's territory. If they were scared away by a few thousand soldiers in an ambush, they would never have a good life in the future. However, before they could release their arrows, another round of arrows shot out. This time, the Frost Mirror cavalrymen were prepared. They pulled on their reins and began to dodge the arrows. However, even if there was a gap in the formation of tens of thousands of people, there was only so much space. In the blink of an eye, many cavalrymen crashed into each other and were thrown off their horses. The number of Frost Mirror cavalrymen who died from being trampled by their horses was even more than the number of people killed by the third round of arrows. At this point, no matter how scared the Frost Mirror riders were, they had no choice but to be ruthless. After all, the enemy was still firing arrows at them. If they continued to waste time here, they would just be wasting their lives. They might as well take out the enemy in one go. Chapter 489. It's about time. Retreat. Sean tilted his head to the side and nimbly leaped onto another tree trunk. The rest of the tree elves also followed suit and began to retreat. After all, they could see that the barbarians had been instigated to the point that they were filled with anger. If they continued to stay here, they would only end up being annihilated by the barbarians' arrows and cavalry charges. After going deep into the forest for a while, the tree elves mounted the 9-colored deer that had been waiting for them and galloped into the depths of the forest with great familiarity. On the other side, the Frost Mirror cavalry finally reorganized their formation. They drew their bowstrings and fired their first volley of arrows at their targets in the distance. However, most of their arrows were scattered on the ground. Let alone their targets, they didn't even make it into the forest in front of them. A group of mounted archers who were good at controlling their lines immediately flushed red. They looked at their companions, not knowing what to do. It wasn't that they weren't good at shooting. It was just that their equipment wasn't on the same level at all. The compound bows in the tree elves' hands were new equipment developed by Lin Yuan's subordinates. Whether it was the range or the speed of their arrows, they were more than 10 times faster than the previous crossbows. Each compound bow could be sold for at least 10,000 gold on the black market. The Frost Mirror cavalry shot back according to their experience. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to reach the enemy's firing positions. Fortunately, they were all professional soldiers. It didn't take long for the entire formation to move quickly and approach the forest. However, when the Frost Mirror cavalry charged into the forest, they realized that the bastards who ambushed them had long fled. The arrows they shot into the forest to protect the cavalry unit were everywhere. However, not a single drop of blood could be seen. It was obvious that the enemy had retreated before they could launch an effective counterattack. The leader of the Frost Mirror cavalry had a gloomy expression. He said fiercely, "Brothers, do you see that? There are only a few thousand of you, and you're already making us cower like quails. If you continue with this attitude, none of us will end well. Now, everyone listen up. Full speed ahead. Catch up to those bastards who dared to go against us and wash away our shame with their blood. Wash away our shame. Kill." The surrounding Frost Mirror cavalrymen also roared in unison. They knew that they had come to the northern frontier mainly to find the 13th prince and loot some good stuff from the northern frontier. Shuang Jianhan had no intention of offending the northern frontier at all. Therefore, since they had divided their forces, they had to ensure that their mission was completed properly. Otherwise, everyone would be implicated when they returned, and no one would end up well. If these people who challenged the dignity of the Shuangjian dynasty didn't die, they would be nailed to the pillar of shame. After all, a war couldn't be easily started. Even if they wanted to prove their bravery on the battlefield, they might not have the chance. After the Frost Mirror cavalrymen dispersed, the trunk of a giant tree shook a few times. A chameleon-like demonic beast slowly revealed itself. It looked at the scattered cavalrymen and sneered, "Lord Dragon King is right. These Shuangjian barbarian are stupid. How dare they fight in the mountains of the northern frontier?" The chameleon stretched its body, which was almost stiff because it had to blend in with the surrounding environment. Then, it quickly climbed down the giant tree and walked towards Donglin City. Even the old hunters in the northern frontier didn't dare to enter the mountains of the northern frontier. After all, it was close to the Hengduan Mountains. No one knew whether the beasts in the mountains were wild beasts or demonic beasts. Moreover, Lin Yuan wanted to give the Frost Mirror cavalrymen a big gift. He didn't have any scruples at all. He directly ordered the beast kings in the periphery of the Hengduan Mountains to send a large number of demonic beasts into the battle. Even in the forest near Donglin City, which was far from the Hengduan Mountains, There were no less than 10,000 demonic beasts hibernating. It was one thing for demonic beasts to come out of the mountains to attack humans, but it was another thing for humans to encounter demonic beasts in the mountains. Moreover, the northern frontier was extremely sensitive right now. The Shenwu dynasty couldn't control this place at all. Lin Yuan was also in cahoots with the demonic beasts. If the Frost Mirror cavalrymen encountered demi-humans or demonic beasts, even if they died, they would die in vain. No one would stand up for them. They wouldn't even get an explanation. Who asked you bunch of reckless barbarians to chase into the territory of the demonic beasts? In the northern frontier prince's mansion, Li Zhong, who was dealing with the reports that had been sent to him, suddenly had his eyes light up. He picked up the report from Donglin City. 2 million Frost Mirror cavalrymen had entered the hinterland of the Shenwu dynasty. Almost 1/10 of the Shuangjian dynasty's army had been mobilized. More importantly, 700,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen had crossed the Wei River and headed for the central plains of the Shenwu dynasty. This was the best news he had received today. After all, the Shenwu dynasty's army and the Shuangjian dynasty's army had reached a tacit agreement to let them pass. If the barbarians had charged into the northern frontier, no one would have said anything. But now, even more barbarians had displayed their usual attitude and attacked the central plains of the Shenwu dynasty on a large scale. Based on the supervision of the Shenwu dynasty in the northern frontier, it would be difficult for the central plains to mobilize enough troops to deal with the 700,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen in a short time, even though Shen Linjun was on his way north. Unless Lei Qiuxing had withdrawn his army from the northern frontier. He had even given up on the source of the Wei River and defended the central plains to the death. You've been hunting geese all day. You finally let the geese peck your eyes. Li Zhong stood up and knocked on the table twice. A moment later, a member of the Association of the Demon Emperor wearing a black robe and a Qianhu of the embroidered uniform guards wearing a white Kirin suit walked into the office at the same time. The two of them looked at each other and snorted in unison, revealing looks of disdain. Yu Tong, mobilize the forces of the Association of the Demon Emperor in the Central Plains. You must spread the news that the Shuangjian barbarian has been released by the Shenwu dynasty's border army to all the cities in the Central Plains before the 700,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen start their slaughter. When the time comes, public opinion will explode. If the Shenwu dynasty's border army doesn't do anything, these soldiers guarding the border can only atone for their crimes with their lives. With a glint in his eyes, Li Zhong took off a jade pendant from his waist and handed it to Yu Tong as he calmly instructed. Once the news that the Frost Mirror cavalrymen had been released by the border army spread, coupled with the 700,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen invading the Central Plains, no matter how thick-skinned Lei Qiuxing was, he couldn't ignore the curses of his people. When the time came, the Shenwu dynasty's border army would have to be mobilized. Otherwise, the millions of border soldiers would have to choose social death. Of course, Lei Qiuxing didn't have to send troops to attack the Shuangjian dynasty. As long as he could seal his pockets and stop the Shuangjian dynasty's cavalrymen from entering the northern frontier, he would be grateful. Chapter 490. Yes, sir. Yu Tong excitedly took the jade pendant from Li Zhong's hand and winked at the genie guard as if he was showing off. Yu Dingxian, your mission is more important than Yu Tong's. Li Zhong picked up a letter with wet ink and handed it to the genie guard. He said in a deep voice, you must pass through the Shuangjian barbarians' blockade before sunset today and hand this letter to Li Zhongxing in Donglin City. Have someone keep an eye on the Shenwu dynasty's border army. Once they give up their original defense line and retreat to the Central Plains, you guys can take advantage of the situation and kill them. While you're at it, you can occupy the source of the Wei River and set up an outpost there. Remember, you must take that place and never lose it. Sir. Yu Dingxian's face turned red as he shouted with all his strength. Obviously, he wanted to compete with Yu Tong. But there's no time to lose. You must complete my mission before sunset today. Otherwise, you will be killed without mercy. Li Zhong nodded with satisfaction and waved his hand to signal the two to leave. Once the Demon Emperor's meeting caused public opinion to explode in the Central Plains and the South, everyone in the Shenwu dynasty would be in danger. The border army would definitely take action. The border army near the north would definitely suffer. As for the border army near the Central Plains, they would have to withdraw their men to defend the Central Plains at least until Shen Lin-jun entered the Central Plains to fight the Frost Mirror Cavalry. At that time, the border would definitely be short of manpower. Other than the necessary checkpoints, there would be no other defenses. Taking the source of the Wei River where the water flow was the smoothest was the same as eliminating the possibility of the Shenwu dynasty's army entering the Central Plains. It would be a joke if those iron cans of the Shenwu heavy infantry wanted to swim across the river. If they went down the Wei River, they would probably sink to the bottom and feed the fish. Unless the Shenwu dynasty could transfer a large number of ships from the south for the army to cross the river, they could only choose to fight Lin Yuan's army upstream with all their forces. Once the war reached that stage, Li Zhong could at least guarantee that the northern frontier would be invincible. After all, the Great Wall project that the Northern Territory was currently carrying out had truly cut off the possibility of the Mirror Frost Cavalry entering the Central Plains. Even the passes and guard stations that originally belonged to the Shenwu dynasty were blocked outside. Therefore, if the Mirror Frost Cavalry wanted to intervene in this war, they could only attack the Shenwu dynasty's main camp from the other side. No matter which side they wanted to help, with Lei Qiusheng's suspicious personality, he would not allow these barbarians to get close to his headquarters. It was only a matter of time before the two sides clashed, let alone now that 700,000 barbarians had invaded the Central Plains. As for the other possibility, Li Zhong could only chuckle. There were indeed many ships in the south, but they were mostly seagoing ships. They might not be able to operate well in the Wei River. Moreover, those ships belonged to the aristocratic families. If Lei Qiusheng wanted to conscript them to fight, it would mean that the aristocratic families in the south who relied on the sea to make a living. Not to mention that the south was now a powder keg that could explode at any time. Even if the northern frontier didn't have any troops in the south, the aristocratic families in the south would still try to wrestle with Lei Qiusheng. He didn't believe that Lei Qiusheng would be so bold as to allow the main forces of the Qingjiang dynasty and the Frost Mirror dynasty to enter the Central Plains together. Even if he was willing, the Frost Mirror dynasty and the Qingjiang dynasty wouldn't be willing. Which of them didn't have a top force backing them? It was true that Lin Yuan wanted to occupy the north and plot against the Shenwu dynasty. If they sent troops to hinder Lin Yuan, they would give Lin Yuan an excuse to attack them. Secondly, if Lin Yuan cut off the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's support for a period of time, their national strength would quickly fall to the bottom. They would become trash that any of the 7 dynasties could step on. After Yu Tong and Yu Dingshan left, Li Zhong strode into the courtyard. He put his right hand to his mouth and whistled. In an instant, a green rock landed directly, and the force of its flapping wings easily raised the dust and fallen leaves in the courtyard. When the cyan rock finally heard him, Li Zhong said slowly, "Tell all the demi-human tribes to quickly enter the North Mountain Forest and wipe out the Frost Mirror Cavalry in batches. 5 days. We need to delay them for at least 5 days. When the time comes, whether we continue to fight or retreat, it will be up to the tribal chiefs to decide. As for the Hengduan mountain range, we don't need you to send troops to help us directly. However, it shouldn't be a problem for you to send 2 more waves of beasts to the Shuangjian dynasty's territory, right?" The cyan rock was obviously very cold. It was a mountain lord-level demonic beast, but it didn't seem to want to communicate with Li Zhong. It just nodded slightly. However, Li Zhong put his hands behind his back and said expressionlessly, "I have one more thing to say. Remember to pass it on. Both the Frost Mirror dynasty and Shenwu dynasty don't see demi-humans and demonic beasts as equal intelligent creatures. You can only live a good life under the rule of the Dragon King. If the North and the Northern Frontier have a new ruler, you will return to your previous life of eating raw meat and drinking blood. Because we are the only ones who see you as our own kind. The other humans will only see you as slaves and animals." The Blackwater army had gone to the south. The Fallen Star army was too small, and the northern army had to guard the northern frontier. The southern expedition seemed to be powerful, but it was actually very scattered. Based on the current situation, none of the troops in the northern frontier were powerful enough. In this war, Lin Yuan could only rely on the demonic beasts and the demonic beasts. However, the demonic beasts didn't completely obey Lin Yuan's orders. They were only temporarily sent by the demonic beast king to support Lin Yuan. They could help Lin Yuan in the war, but they would never risk their lives for him. Most of the demonic beasts weren't as smart as humans. They thought that even if Lin Yuan lost the war and lost their territory, they would just retreat back to the Hengduan mountain range and continue their lives. They didn't consider the expansion of the Hengduan mountain range and the existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, which would be a great help to the overall strength of the Hengduan mountain range. Therefore, Li Zhong's words were not only to bring this demonic beast to the demonic beasts, but also to the demonic beasts. Although the demonic beasts could risk their lives for the demonic beasts, the Shenwu dynasty had enslaved them for many years. They would risk their lives for their own survival, but they wouldn't risk their lives for Lin Yuan's rule. Therefore, most of the demonic beasts were still in the northern frontier. Lin Yuan was worried that these demonic beasts would be blinded by the Shenwu dynasty's words. They thought that even if the northern frontier had a new ruler, they could still live a comfortable life under Lin Yuan's rule. Therefore, only a few loyal demonic beasts, such as Xiao En, participated in the war. Only by uncovering the bloody scars of their past could these demonic beasts realize that everything they had now was a gift from Lin Yuan. Chapter 491. Got it. Only then did Qing Peng nod his head with a solemn expression, and he replied. After Qing Peng flapped its wings and flew away, Li Zhong let out a sigh of relief. A hint of worry flashed across his face. Although he had made a lot of arrangements, he could only turn the situation in the most advantageous direction for the northern frontier if every chess piece was placed in the right position. Once one of the conditions was not met, the northern frontier would have a hard time moving forward. After all, it was not crazy to fight against a dynasty with a small territory. It was completely foolish. If Lin Yuan had not run the northern region into a one-man rule, held the lifeline of the 7 dynasties, and happened to be in troubled times, the current northern region would not even have the qualifications to fall out with Lei Qiusheng. Faction War Model. Name: Northern Defense War, Ongoing, Attacking Side, Frost Mirror, Shenwu, Powerful, Defending Side, Blackwater Dragon Palace, Normal, Evaluation. The host's chances of winning are not high. Please balance the combat power of both sides as soon as possible. Otherwise, there will be a danger of destruction. If the host wins this war, the host will receive 100,000 war points. If the host loses this war, the host will have to pay a few 100,000 war points. War mission, not released. Looking at the faction war model that suddenly popped up in front of him, Lin Yuan's mouth twitched slightly. The current Shenwu dynasty, which was extremely weak, and the Shuangjian dynasty, which was not using its full strength, was still above the northern frontier. This was not out of Lin Yuan's expectations. After all, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. If Lei Qiusheng really did not see any hope of winning, he would have dragged Lin Yuan down with him a long time ago. What made Lin Yuan gasp was that the rewards and punishments for this war far exceeded the sum of all his previous wars. Once this battle was lost, Lin Yuan would not be able to afford such a huge loss. It would be good enough if he was reduced to an ordinary black serpent by strenuous cultivation. He was afraid that he would be directly squeezed dry, and then the system would directly remove the binding with him. The most terrifying thing was that this was only the prelude to the war. The final battle between him and the Shenwu dynasty had not even begun. The generals and armies of both sides had not even clashed once. They had only been scheming against each other, and the situation had already become unsalvageable. Actually, if it were anyone else, both sides would just suffer some losses and forget about this matter. However, Lin Yuan and Lei Qiusheng were the kind of people who would rather die than lose face. Originally, it was just a few secret clashes between the two of them that caused the two of them to become really angry. It evolved into a war that even the Shuangjin dynasty was involved in today. Lin Yuan pursed his lips, but the movement of his feet had obviously sped up. The first step to balance the fighting power of both sides was to pull out the nail of the enemy in the north. With Lin Yuan's current cultivation, he had set out from the northern frontier early and arrived at Wei River City before sunset. 5,000 soldiers of the Fallen Star Army and Gao Buzhan had set up a camp 10 miles away from Wei River City. There were also 30,000 new soldiers who had been transferred from the Northern Battlefront Army to the Fallen Star Army. They all looked energetic. There were at least 2,000 or 3,000 corpses piled up outside Wei River City. Judging from the style of their armors, they obviously belonged to Shin Lin Jun. However, there was no engraving of Shin Lin on their left armors, which meant that these people were the reserves of Shin Lin Jun. They were far from the main force of Shin Lin Jun. Lin Yuan stood in the air outside the camp. In less than 3 breaths, Gao Buzhan, who was wearing a silver armor, strode over with a faint smile on his face. Fallen Star Army, Gao Buzhan. Greetings, Lord Dragon King. I can't salute you fully because of my armor. Please forgive me, Lord Dragon King. Lin Yuan nodded slightly to Gao Buzhan and asked directly, "What's the matter with those corpses outside the city?" After the barbarian cavalry entered the city, I had Marshal Li lead the main force to Eastwood City. When these little bastards saw that the main force stationed outside the city had left, they felt that their chance to stir up trouble had come. They first sent more than 10,000 men out of the city to test our strength. In the end, we drove them back the moment they saw us. Gao Buzhan didn't care about it at all. It was as if he didn't defeat the famous reserves of Shin Lin Jun, but a bunch of chickens and pottery dogs. Well, it seems that you have fought with them. How do you feel? Lin Yuan glanced around the camp and found that almost everyone, including Gao Buzhan, was injured, but there was no fatal wound. As long as the wound was healed, as long as they didn't move too much, even their movement would not be affected. More importantly, although the number of these 35,000 people was better than the 10,000 Shin Lin Jun who came out to explore, 30,000 of them were just recruits who had received military training for a period of time. It would be good if they didn't cause trouble on the fierce battlefield. They couldn't help much at all. But the opponent was the famous Shin Lin Jun, who was known as the First Army of Shenwu. Even if he was just a reserve, he was selected from countless professional soldiers. His fighting power was not small. In such a situation, there was only one way to defeat the opponent with 0 casualties. That was to kill the general and capture the flag. It seemed that the former champion of the Fallen Star Army was still as brave as before. At most, it took him only 3 moves to kill the main general of Shin Lin Jun's side. This made the remaining Shin Lin Jun lose the will to fight, leading to a one-sided massacre. Speaking of this issue, Gao Buzhan showed a serious look and said in a deep voice, "Feeling? Feeling weak. This group of rice worms has the title of the First Army of Shenwu, but it is far worse than the army of our generation. Not to mention my Fallen Star Army, even those who just got the title of the First Army could easily defeat them." After all, the 7 dynasties had been peaceful for a long time. The most chaotic period should be the period when Lei Qiusheng usurped the throne. The army under his command fought day and night with the army loyal to the Shenwu dynasty. Even the army of the First Army was quite strong. But after decades, those brave and invincible officers in the past were full of fat, and those loyal soldiers under their command had no hope of promotion. Naturally, they left the army early to find another way out. Compared with these old soldiers who had been peaceful for a long time, the Fallen Star Army was indeed a bit of a bully. Of course, not all of them were old soldiers. It was just that the soldiers who fought in the situation where the whole country was a battlefield and were surrounded by enemies looked down on these Shuangjian barbarian soldiers who at most fought with the beast tide and pretended to rob the border every year. Except for the border troops who were fighting in the north and the west, there were not many troops who dared to say that they could withstand the attack of the Fallen Star Army. Chapter 492. Is it possible to charge down Wei River City in one round? Lin Yuan raised his eyelids and asked. Gao Chuanjun was silent for a moment before honestly shaking his head. He said bitterly, "Dragon King Darren, these little bastards don't deserve their reputation, but Wei River City is a fortress run by the Shenwu dynasty for many years. The city walls are hard and smooth. We can't get up without suitable siege weapons. There are also those ballistae and cannons. Even if we build siege chariots, it's one thing to say if we can break open the gates, but it's another thing to say if we can reach the gates." Speaking of this, Gao Chuanjun was clearly listless. He said listlessly, "If it wasn't for those siege weapons, none of the 10,000 people who left the city would be able to return alive." Today's battlefield was no longer the Azura field that Gao Jie was familiar with. The high walls of the city combined with all kinds of defensive equipment, even the endless beast tide would be worn down to death, let alone the generals who were good at charging and breaking through enemy lines. Taking down the reserve general of the Divine Forest Guards was just a warm-up for a fierce general like Gao Jiezhen. But before he could vent his hot blood, the other side retreated back to Wei River City. Like a turtle that had retreated back into its shell, Gao Jiezhen felt helpless despite his peerless martial prowess. "Just make it so they can't use it." Lin Yuan opened his mouth and showed a cold smile. In the next moment, the originally calm Wei River suddenly boiled and roared. Water dragons roared into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it was as if the entire Wei River had turned into a dragon and stood upright. Even Gao Chuanjun, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, couldn't help but gulp. No matter how strong a cultivator was, they couldn't fight against the heavens and earth. Even Kongming experts who didn't fear water or fire would lose to the corrosion of time. Lin Yuan's method of borrowing the power of the heavens and earth was almost beyond Gao Chuanjun's understanding. Using his own power to move the entire Wei River for his own use, what kind of terrifying power was this? Gao Buzhen had seen similar battles before. It was just that at that time, the Falling Star Army was in its heyday. Nearly 10,000 cultivators of the water system were mobilized, and they only managed to turn a river less than 1/5 of the Wei River into a water dragon to help them attack the city. In that battle, they almost didn't encounter any decent resistance, because most of the soldiers and generals in the city had been drowned or knocked to death before they entered the city. While Wei River City would have corresponding defensive measures, with the Wei River pouring down, the siege weapons on the city walls should have been mostly destroyed. The cannons filled with water couldn't fire. In an instant, the battle returned to the rhythm he was familiar with. Trouble. The reserve officer of the Divine Forest Army on the city wall of Wei River City looked at the rising water dragons with a gloomy expression. This fortress built on the banks of Wei River couldn't be unguarded against the enemy using water to attack the city. The city had extremely advanced drainage channels. Once the water dragon pounced into Wei River City, it would quickly be swatted away by the drainage channels. But if such a terrifying water dragon came crashing down, the weapons on the city walls would definitely be destroyed, and the city gates might even be blasted open. The reserve officer took a deep breath and shouted, "Go to the storehouse and move rocks and sandbags to reinforce the city gates. Don't let the water dragons break open the gates." The elite soldiers selected from the various troops were naturally not weak. At the very least, they were able to withstand the pressure of the water dragons and not be killed on the spot. However, once the city gate was breached, it would not be a small matter for the people outside to rush in. For example, the general who led the team to scout the way was considered one of the strongest among them. However, he could not even last 3 moves against the silver-armored general. For these generals, cultivation didn't necessarily determine victory or defeat. Their mentality, martial arts skills, and even familiarity with battle formations would all determine victory or defeat on the battlefield. These were all very important factors. He didn't want to face the silver-armored general who was like a wolf or a tiger. The reaction of the officer on the city walls was very fast. But the moment he opened his mouth, the water dragons had already crashed down. The water dragons hit the city walls and suddenly exploded, turning into a large amount of water with a strong impact. It scattered the siege weapons on the city walls and washed away dozens of Shin Lin Jun's reserve soldiers who couldn't dodge in time. At the same time, they suddenly fell into the city. Most of them were drained away by the drainage system, but some of them hit the city gates hard. Gao Buzhen and the Shenlin Jun's reserve soldiers in the city all stared at the city gates. The city gates only shook twice but didn't break open. The officer on the city walls had a relieved expression on his face. But in the next moment, a white mist slowly rose. The Shenlin Jun's body that was still wet suddenly had large and small ice cubes appear on their bodies. They shivered and the city gates directly turned into ice gates. Charge! Lin Yuan glanced at Gao Buzhen beside him and ordered in a low voice. Gao Buzhen was slightly startled, but he quickly recovered. Gao Buzhen, who had already engraved obedience to orders in his bones, looked at the frozen city gates and directly turned over on his horse. He squeezed the horse's belly with his legs and roared, "Charge!" The 35,000 soldiers wearing the armor of the Fallen Star Army didn't hesitate. They followed closely behind Gao Buzhen and launched a charge toward Wei River City. Lin Yuan pushed back more than 10 meters. He wrapped 2 huge logs with his tail and threw them toward the city gates fiercely. His speed was several times faster than the charging group of Fallen Star Army. They hit the frozen city gates one after another. With 2 crisp sounds, the city gates that separated the 2 armies instantly shattered into pieces. Kill! Gao Buzhen's eyes lit up. The speed of his horse increased by 30% and rushed into Wei River City first. Gao Buzhen held an 18-foot-long mace in his hand. It was also silver-white. With just one wave, 4 Shenlin Jun who were originally near the city gates were smashed into pieces. The 300,000 Shenlin Jun's reserve soldiers in the city couldn't even block for a moment. They were directly knocked to the ground by the Fallen Star Army. They originally hoped that the thick city gates would bring them enough protection, but the bloody reality slapped them hard in the face. The 2 officers of the Divine Forest Army took a deep breath and raised the weapons in their hands to meet Gao Jiejian. Although they weren't as strong as Gao Buzhen in the original army, they were still very strong. Being rushed by the enemy as if they were in a no-man's land, they felt ashamed. Chapter 493. In the past, the champion of the Myriad Swords dynasty had earned his reputation from the battle of breaking through enemy lines. Not to mention him, even the 5,000 veteran soldiers of the Fallen Star Army that he had brought with him could easily deal with these so-called elites. After all, they were completely incomparable to the experienced soldiers of the Myriad Swords dynasty. Seeing the 2 strong men rushing towards him, Gao Jiejian was not in a hurry. He gently turned the mace in his hand and separated the 2 men's weapons. At the same time, he urged his war horse to charge forward. His left hand pulled the reins, and the war horse immediately reared up. Its 2 front hooves fiercely stamped on the chest of one of the generals, and immediately kicked him upside down. If it was Lin Yuan's body from his previous life, being kicked like this by a war horse, even if the gods descended, they would not be able to save him. However, the soldiers of the Tianwu continent more or less had cultivation. Even if they were not in the Heaven Dipper realm, they could not be hurt by ordinary animals. The general was just careless and was sent flying, but he was not hurt at all. With a flip of his body, he regained his standing position. However, in this gap, Gao Jiejian turned the mace in his right hand and easily knocked away the spear in the other general's hand. He then pulled the mace back, and the front end of the mace fiercely smashed the general's head. Suddenly, the general's entire head was smashed. The general who had regained his battle stance saw that his comrade had ended up in such a miserable state. Although his eyes were red, his fear eventually won over his anger. He actually lost the courage to go forward and fight with Gao Jiejian. He turned around and ran towards the crowd. Where do you think you are going? Gao Jiejian laughed for a while. His right hand just threw the mace forward, and in a flash, it hit the general's back. The general's body just trembled, and suddenly fell to the ground and died on the spot. A group of Shenlin Jun's reserve soldiers who came out with the 2 officers also trembled. No one dared to look at Gao Jiejian, this killing god. After all, in the Wei River City where elites walked everywhere, those who could become officers were all ruthless people. Even the reserve soldiers were not to be underestimated. They were either king soldiers from the original army, or they were the one-in-a-million geniuses among the orphans adopted by Shen Linjun. If the two officers were placed in Shen Linjun's reserve force, they would be considered to be at the top. Even in the reserve force, they would be able to fight against 100 people. Even the generals in Shen Linjun's main force would not be at a disadvantage. However, at that moment, the two of them did not even have a chance to fight back under the high level of force. If they were not arrogant and wanted to join Shen Linjun's main force as officers, they could have gotten rid of the reserve force and started as soldiers in the main force. If they could do it all over again, these people would rather be part of the main force than stay in Wei River City and face a killing god like Gao Jiezhen. Unfortunately, there was no chance to do it all over again. They would not know how much power Gao Jiezhen had exerted when he fought with them. They would not know how big the gap was between them and those soldiers who were also killed in one move. Gao Lijian was not in a hurry to retrieve his weapon. He just shook off the yellow and white substance on his right hand and directly pulled out his sword from his waist and roared, "Brothers, teach this group of self-righteous little bastards what it means to be an elite. Kill. General Gao is invincible. Kill these little bastards." As the saying goes, a soldier is strong, but a general is strong. With such a ferocious general like Gao Jie, not to mention the 5,000 experienced veterans of the Fallen Star Army, even the 30,000 new soldiers felt their blood boiling as if they had inexhaustible strength. Their opponents, who were well matched in strength, were no different from chickens and dogs in their eyes. Therefore, their attacks were much more vicious than before. Witnessing this scene, Lin Yuan nodded slightly with a touch of relief in his eyes. In terms of individual quality, except for the 5,000 veteran soldiers of Fallen Star Army, the rest of the 30,000 soldiers were probably not as good as Shen Linjun's reserve force. But at this moment, the two sides could evolve from fighting back and forth to a one-sided massacre. This was the role of morale. Even between elites and trash, the biggest difference was not the quality, but whether they wanted to and dared to fight this battle. Obviously, Shen Linjun's reserve force, who were scared out of their wits, could not come up with a way to deal with Gao Jiezhen. Naturally, they lost their courage and changed from the initial formation to a timid look. These guys, do they have a backup plan? Lin Yuan paid attention to the movements in Wei River City and could not help narrowing his eyes slightly. In a desperate situation, human beings often made two different decisions. One was to kneel down and surrender, and the other was to fight to the death. But Shen Linjun's reserve force in front of him did not want to continue to be entangled with Fallen Star Army, and on the other hand, did not want to surrender. They changed from being evenly matched to a turtle tactic, constantly shrinking the line of defense. As long as they could not fight, they would not fight. Obviously, these Shen Linjun's reserve force had a third choice. However, a moment later, Lin Yuan was surprised to find that he didn't know what kind of materials were used to build Wei River City. His Eye of God could observe Wei River City from above, but there was no way to penetrate the buildings or the ground to explore whether there was a tunnel under Wei River City that could evacuate from this place. Since he could not come up with anything real, Lin Yuan could only keep silent and not interfere with Gao Jiezhen's battle. But he already knew that it was impossible to defeat these Shen Linjun's reserve force in one battle. Fortunately, he had other preparations. Without the strong protection of Wei River City, even if the Shen Linjun's reserve force could escape to various places in the north through the secret tunnel in the city, they could only be regarded as bandits who caused chaos. They could not do anything. Thinking of this, Lin Yuan could not come up with a solution at the moment. He could only let Gao Jiezhen be the scapegoat. He could not order Gao Jiezhen to disband the formation and attack the enemy's formation with all his strength, right? Not to mention the difference in military strength between the two sides, the military quality was even more incomparable. Once the formation was disbanded, it was not impossible for these Shen Linjun's reserve force to turn around and defeat Fallen Star Army. Lin Yuan would never make such a stupid decision. After all, Gao Jiezhen was still very useful. And in a short time, he could not mobilize other troops to support Wei River City. Once they took back the city, this nail would be nailed to death. At that time, with the protection of Wei River City's defense equipment, most of the Shenwu dynasty could pass through Wei River and come to the north by boat. Even if they came in batches, it would be a bad result that Lin Yuan could not bear. Chapter 494. It was funny that 300,000 Shen Lin Jun's reserve soldiers were suppressed by 35,000 soldiers. No matter how many waves of counterattacks they organized, as long as they hit the 5,000 veteran soldiers of Fallen Star Army, all the attacks would be turned into nothing. Instead, they were pushed forward step by the opponent, gradually losing the geographical advantage of Weha City. Even the speed of shrinking the front line was accelerating. The way to deal with a fierce general was very simple. Let him be arrogant, go deep into the enemy's territory alone, and then encircle and kill him. But facing 5,000 fierce generals at the same time, as well as Gao Buzhan, who was one level higher than the fierce generals, could be said to be a peerless fierce general, and had extremely rich war experience, it was indeed a bit difficult for these little bastards. Looking at the whole Shenwu dynasty, only those old brothers in the past could compete with the 5,000 veteran soldiers of Fallen Star Army. But after decades, not everyone was as bad as Gao Buzhan and was excluded by the higher-ups. A small number of them retired and returned to their hometown. For example, the 5,000 soldiers of Fallen Star Army brought by Yan Xingqi were not implicated, but they were not willing to work for Lei Qiusheng. Most of them had now entered the army of Shenwu dynasty and even held positions in the Ministry of War of the Imperial Court and became important big shots. After years of living like royalty, how much courage could they still maintain? If it were not for the Shen Lin Jun and the small number of soldiers of Fallen Star Army. With this army, Lin Yuan could stand proudly in the north and rule across the river from Lei Qiusheng and not be attacked by the Shuangjin barbarian. After all, if the strength of both sides was equal, neither Lin Yuan nor Lei Qiusheng would blindly break the balance, because that would only be taken advantage of by others. Neither of them could laugh until the end. But now the military strength of Shenwu dynasty was far above the northern frontier, but the speed of growth was far slower than the northern frontier. That was why Lei Qiusheng was anxious to suppress the northern frontier and was determined to strangle this giant in the cradle. That was why the Frost Mirror Barbarian had entered the pass. But as the fighting became longer and longer, Gao Buzhan also got rid of the hot blood of returning to the battlefield and looked at the problem with a calm attitude again. Soon, Gao Buzhan realized that something was wrong. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The Divine Forest Army's reserves were losing members too fast. Gao Jie felt that even if these 35,000 people were replaced with the main force of the Fallen Star Army, they would not be able to cause such a huge loss of members. As the enemy's defensive line became smaller and smaller, their battle formation also became smaller and smaller, sacrificing some soldiers in exchange for a chance to retreat. Gao Chuanjin frowned slightly, and his face suddenly turned cold. He raised the sword in his hand and said fiercely, "Everyone, follow me and charge." Seeing that Gao Buzhan had sped up the attack, the commander of Shen Lin Jun's reserve force also understood that his abnormal speed of losing soldiers didn't escape the eyes of the enemy. But soon, a determined look flashed across his face, and he shouted, "This guy has found out our intention. It won't be so easy to escape. Quickly seal the tunnel and face the enemy." As the voice fell, nearly 40% of Shen Lin Jun's reserve force in the field were defeated. The enemy only had 35,000 people, and with the loss of soldiers during the battle, it was estimated that there were less than 30,000 people left now. Even if they were all unstoppable, it was impossible for them to have such a big appetite to eat all of them. Therefore, in their initial estimation, they only needed to lose about 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers to protect most of the good seedlings and escape from here. Therefore, the outermost army formation was basically made up of old guys with inferior cultivation aptitude. They were all veterans who were willing to sacrifice themselves. But after this order was issued, the rest of the soldiers who had the chance to retreat were suddenly a little unhappy. Especially the few officers who were about to enter the tunnel, Their faces were so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. The commander's face was also gloomy, and he said coldly, "If those people rush in without caring about their lives, how long can we hold on? When we enter the tunnel, we will be caught. Not only will we have no way to survive, but we will also implicate our brothers who have already escaped." In the time it took to talk, the outermost line of defense had been completely torn apart. Under the incomparable charge of Gao Buzhen, these so-called elites were just small soldiers who could kill dozens of soldiers with one strike. Seal the tunnel and prepare the camp. Although the face of the officer at the entrance of the tunnel was not good for a long time, his face was a little more relieved. Since this was fate, what was there to hesitate about? Even if he sacrificed himself in exchange for his brothers to escape, there would be a day when someone would avenge him. Yes, even if the situation had deteriorated to this point, these soldiers who had been instilled with the idea of being loyal to Lei Qiusheng still did not think that the Shenwu dynasty would lose this war. Right now, they were just letting that black Jiao be arrogant for a few more days. Without much hesitation, they decisively pulled down a mechanism. The tunnel entrance that was originally big enough for 3 to 4 people to pass through collapsed in an instant. The original entrance was already covered by sand, and it would take at least half a day to dig out the entrance again. Damn it! The sound of the tunnel entrance being destroyed was not small, and Gao Buzhen could clearly feel the tremors under his feet. Almost instantly, Gao Buzhen guessed what those people had done and could not help but curse with a gloomy face. Outside the city, Lin Yuan also felt the change and guessed that the mechanism in the city had been destroyed. Although it was a pity, he could only shake his head lightly and sneered, "If you want to wedge a nail, then so be it. Why did you have to choose to do it near Wei River? Courting death." In fact, the Shenwu dynasty had never considered the hidden dangers in the north. After all, the aristocratic families in the north were generally weaker than the south, and there was also the Hengduan Mountains in the north. Therefore, the only force in the north that could threaten the Shenwu dynasty was the Frost Mirror Barbarian. Wei River City was a fortress built by Lei Qiusheng. Not only was it used as a base for Shen Linjun, but it could also be used as a refuge for the descendants of the Lei family. Lei Qiusheng had never thought that the situation would deteriorate to the point that Shen Linjun had to leave his base. He also did not expect that the Hengduan Mountains, where there were many birds and beasts, would give birth to an anomaly like Lin Yuan. He actually used his own strength to mobilize the Wei River for his own use. He also did not expect that Lin Yuan did not mobilize all of his military forces to fight against the Shuangjin barbarian when the Frost Mirror barbarian invaded. Instead, he maintained his conquest of the entire northern territory. All kinds of situations that Lei Qiusheng had never thought of piled up together led to the fall of this so-called impregnable fortress. Chapter 495. However, the fall of the fortress was only the first step. Gao Chuanjin quickly rushed to the entrance of the tunnel. He frowned and thought for a moment. Then he found some soldiers who were still energetic and began to dig the ground. After 2 hours, they finally cleared out all the sand, revealing a dark and endless tunnel. Gao Chuanjin's face showed a little joy. The joy on Gao Chuanjin's face didn't last long. He calmly sent a group of soldiers down to explore the tunnel. He also told them that no matter if they met Shen Linjun's reserve soldiers, they should send someone back to report every half an hour. However, after several groups of people went down, not a single person came back to report. This made Gao Chuanjin's heart turn cold, because he didn't even hear the sound of fighting. In addition, he sent 3,000 to 4,000 people. It was impossible for them to not even have a chance to retreat before being wiped out by Shen Linjun's reserve soldiers. Then, the only possibility was that there was something wrong with this tunnel. After reorganizing his thoughts, Gao Chuzhen chased away the joy of victory from his mind. He did indeed remember some rumors about Lei Qiusheng when he was building this fortress that was known as impregnable. At the beginning of the construction, the designer had built many secret tunnels filled with traps in Wei River City. Unless one had the original blueprints, one might die from the traps if they entered the tunnels. Even if one's cultivation was high enough that the traps couldn't do anything to them, It was easy to get lost in the labyrinthine tunnels. After that, in order to keep it a secret, even the designer was secretly executed by Lei Qiusheng. Only Shen Linjun's generals and temporary commanders knew the structure of the tunnels. These people were basically going to serve Shen Linjun for life until they died of old age. Their purpose was to ensure the absolute safety of this tunnel. After thinking this through, Gao Chuanjun could only bitterly laugh twice and accept the fact that he didn't want to accept. There was no way to break this tunnel. Either he got the blueprint or he could only leave it alone. In this battle, nearly 100,000 Shen Linjun's reserve troops were annihilated. However, after the rest of the troops escaped into the underground tunnel, even a general like Gao Buzhen, who had been through hundreds of battles, couldn't help but hesitate. He didn't even know how to face Lin Yuan. After all, they didn't know how long these tunnels were, how many changes there were, and where the exit at the other end of the tunnels was. Moreover, after losing 3,000 to 4,000 men, Gao Jiezhen didn't dare to take any more risks with his brothers. The only thing they could be sure of was that no matter how long this tunnel was, it couldn't go all the way to the Central Plains. After all, they didn't know how deep the Wei River was, and it was impossible for them to go around it. If they really dug such a deep tunnel, it wouldn't be able to provide enough support, and it could collapse at any time. At that time, not only would they not be able to protect the tunnel, even the fortress above ground would be destroyed together with it. Therefore, it was impossible for these Shen Linjun's reserve troops to return to the Central Plains. They could only go to different places in the north through different secret tunnels, and then become a nail that was nailed into the palm of the northern frontier. Although Gao Jiezhen already knew that he couldn't do his best in this battle, the two sides were in a deadlock here. Compared to the Shen Linjun's reserve troops escaping from under his nose, it was two different things. The former was just a lack of troops and siege equipment, but the latter was tantamount to pointing at his nose and calling him a piece of trash. Gao Jiezhen, who was helpless, could only secretly spit and curse. They claimed to be invincible, but in the end, they dug so many rat holes in the ground. They want to be a whore and set up a monument to their chastity. It doesn't matter. They're just a group of defeated soldiers. At most, they'll be disgusting, but they won't be a big problem. Lin Yuan, who walked in from outside the city, comforted Gao Jiezhen and said with a chuckle, "Old Gao, I'll leave the construction of the defense line along the river to you. You must come up with your first plan within 3 days. This is your chance to become famous in the northern frontier. Although Li Zhong and the others will definitely raise objections, if you can make it perfect and pass it with a unanimous vote, then the impact on your future will definitely be different from the subsequent plans that need to be modified and pieced together." Hearing Lin Yuan's words, Gao Jiezhen's face also turned red, which was rare. Although he was ostracized in the Shenwu dynasty for decades, this didn't mean that Gao Jiezhen didn't care about fame. If that was the case, then why did he join the Fallen Star Army in the first place? Why did he have to risk his life to become a champion? Yan Xingqi had been exiled in the northern frontier for decades. Although his old subordinates still respected him, his prestige was not as high as before. Otherwise, under Yan Xingqi's call, there would be more than just Gao Jiezhen and his 5,000 old brothers who came to the northern frontier to join Lin Yuan. What really attracted Gao Jiezhen was the talent selection system of the northern frontier. In the northern frontier, one's background, wealth, status, and even reputation didn't matter much. If one wanted to become a real person in the northern frontier, then one needed to have enough ability. As a former champion, Gao Jiezhen was confident that he could occupy a place in the northern frontier military. However, after the establishment of the Northern Frontier Academy, Gao Jiezhen saw many talents in the field of military studies. This made him worry about his future position. His only advantage now was that he had rich experience on the battlefield. Moreover, he didn't need to study those basic courses on the battlefield to be able to directly enter the battlefield. If he couldn't establish his own authority now, then when the northern frontier was filled with bright stars in the future, he wouldn't have much room to do. And now, the defense line along the river was bound to become the first battlefield against the main forces of the Shenwu dynasty. Whether or not the northern frontier could withstand the first round of the Shenwu dynasty's counterattack would depend on how far-sighted this defense line plan was. Whether or not it could make the generals of the Shenwu dynasty rack their brains to think of a way to defeat them. As long as they could withstand the first round of the Shenwu dynasty's counterattack, even if the defense line was destroyed in the following tug-of-war, Gao Jiezhen could rely on this contribution to become one of the future generals of the northern frontier. Moreover, it would be an extremely dazzling one. It would definitely be more valuable than a champion in name only. Moreover, this defense line not only had to be impenetrable, but it also had to be exquisitely designed and inexpensive. Otherwise, with the financial resources of the northern frontier, if they wanted to carry out the Great Wall Plan and the defense line along the river at the same time, there was no doubt that they would be unable to make ends meet. It was even possible that next year's financial resources would be overdrawn to the point of a deficit. Gao Jiezhen dismounted from his horse and knelt in front of Lin Yuan on one knee. He clasped his fist and said, "This subordinate is not talented. I can only repay the Dragon King with my life." Chapter 496. Apart from the brief interlude in Wei River City, the entire northern battlefield had entered a white-hot zone. The Yao beasts and demi-human warriors hiding in the forest taught the Frost Mirror barbarians a good lesson. For the first time, the Frost Mirror barbarians personally experienced that war wasn't as simple as being completely annihilated by the other side or completely annihilated by the other side. Under the command of the graduates of the Northern Frontier Academy, the demi-human army methodically divided the Frost Mirror barbarian army into pieces of meat that made them drool. Then, taking advantage of the terrain where the enemy's warhorses weren't suitable for charging in the mountains and forests, as well as the overwhelming advantage of the Northern Frontier's armaments, the demi-human army slowly devoured the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers who dared to enter the mountains and forests. After losing nearly 200,000 soldiers, the Frost Mirror barbarian commanders also learned of the strategy of "don't enter the forest." They didn't give the Northern Frontier a chance to divide and tear them apart, and took the initiative to disperse their forces and occupy the plains. In this way, the Northern Frontier Army's lack of training was highlighted, and the quality of the soldiers was uneven. After all, in a large battle, your fellow soldiers and comrades would give you a chance to fill in the gaps. But in a small-scale battle, everyone couldn't even take care of themselves. Who would have the time to clean up your mess? However, the setback on the Northern Frontier was within everyone's expectations, and they didn't fall into a disappointing situation. They changed their previous aggressive attitude and concentrated their forces in the mountains and forests, or stationed them in places that the army had to pass through. In any case, they didn't continue to engage in small-scale battles with the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers. This made the Shuangjin barbarian soldiers suffer, because their primary mission in the Northern Frontier wasn't to suppress the Northern Frontier, but to find the 13th Prince. The 13th Prince was the Frost Mirror Khan's favorite son, and he was even called Batu on the grassland, which meant the warrior of the grassland. In the Frost Mirror grassland where power determined status, having such a son ensured that Shuang Jihan would be able to protect his Xueliao tribe from being swallowed up by other tribes even if he was pulled down from the throne of Great Khan by other tribes. After all, the 13th Prince's Xueliao cavalry was a tough nut to crack. Anyone who wanted to chew on them would have to grind their teeth off. Those tribes wanted to preserve their strength, so they naturally wouldn't engage in a bloody battle with the Xueliao tribe. But now, they were trapped in the northern plains, unable to advance even half a step. Moreover, they did not know what was happening behind them. Even their supply line had been cut off by the Northern Frontier Army. Until now, not a single grain of rice had been sent in. Seeing that their rations were about to run out, they had no choice but to kill extra warhorses to satisfy their hunger. But where would they find extra warhorses? The Shuangjin barbarian soldiers could only kill the exhausted warhorses and replace their mounts with the other two warhorses that had not ridden into the northern frontier. This was tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst, because if they didn't change their mounts, the most fatal problem for the cavalry would be their stamina problem. Originally, They could still plunder the cities in the northern frontier, but Li Zhong's strategy of erecting walls and clearing the wilderness left only a few troops disguised as Shenwu dynasty soldiers in the northern frontier. There was only a small amount of rations left, and it wasn't even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. These soldiers who stayed behind to guard the northern frontier were basically doing it voluntarily. Their bravery was unparalleled, so it wasn't easy to chew on a hard bone, and even if they did, they wouldn't be full. After a few losses, they gave up on those cities. They didn't even know what to do with the captives they caught. It would be a waste to kill them. After all, although the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers were good at fighting in the wilderness, they were not good at sieging cities. They didn't know that the northern frontier had removed the city walls, so they naturally had to keep a certain number of cannon fodder and slaves to prepare for a war of attrition against the cities of the northern frontier. It was exactly the same strategy as the beast tied when attacking human cities. Therefore, it wasn't unreasonable for them to be called barbarians. Apart from looking like humans, they were almost no different from monsters in the eyes of the other 6 great empires. But if they kept these people alive, they would have more food to feed. If this went on, they might even eat humans with bloodshot eyes. Before these Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers entered the northern frontier, they naturally didn't know that the aristocratic families and sects in the northern frontier had already been wiped out by Li Zhongxing. Under the operation of the embroidered uniform guards, all the wealth accumulated by those aristocratic families had been swallowed up by Lin Yuan. As long as the people in the cities were evacuated, the entire northern frontier would instantly become a battlefield. Without the obstruction of the aristocratic families and sects, this step was particularly easy. After all, no one wanted to live on the battlefield. There was no guarantee that they would lose their lives at any time. The supplies were transported by the supply caravans, and the routes of the supply caravans were basically in the mountains or places where there were large numbers of soldiers. With just these Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers, it was impossible for them to steal anything without paying a heavy price. Moreover, several times before they succeeded, the soldiers of the northern frontier actually set fire to the caravans and even fought directly on the burning caravans. In the end, the soldiers and the caravans were burned to ashes together. They didn't give them any supplies at all. In particular, these supply caravans were all from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. These guys who had been traveling in the Hengduan Mountains all year round were not to be trifled with. They had to be on guard at all times against demonic beasts or other forces in the northern frontier. Their fighting ability in the mountains and plains was not much worse than the demi-human army and demonic beasts. They were the toughest of the toughest. After all, the 13th prince had been lost in the northern frontier. Now, even the main forces of the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers were having such a hard time, let alone the 13th prince, who they had lost contact with for a long time. At this moment, most of the Shuangjin barbarian soldiers believed that the 13th prince, who had lost contact with the Frost Mirror grassland, had most likely died at the hands of the people of the northern frontier. Even the Bloodridge Knights who were originally from the Bloodridge tribe didn't believe that the 13th prince was still alive. After this period of fighting, the people of the northern frontier were fiercer and more barbaric than the Shuangjin barbarian soldiers. Many of the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers were even thinking of retreating. They felt that it was useless to continue staying in the northern frontier. It was better for them to go back and recuperate. Although the Frost Mirror barbarian soldiers were allocated with 3 horses per person, they couldn't eat all of them. Although the people of the grassland knew how to fight, if they wanted to cross the Frost Mirror grassland on foot without horses, it was no different from suicide. The Shuangjian barbarian soldiers were gloomy. They even began to secretly complain about their ally, the Shenwu dynasty. After all, they had agreed to it on the surface. Until now, the Shenwu dynasty had not sent a single soldier to put pressure on the northern frontier. Otherwise, the Shuangjian barbarian soldiers would never have fallen to such a miserable state. Chapter 497. The war gradually reached its climax, but the Shenwu dynasty still didn't make a move. It wasn't that they didn't want to take this opportunity to attack the northern frontier, but the Frost Mirror barbarian troops entering the Central Plains were like fish entering water. Fighting cavalry in the Endless Plains was undoubtedly foolish. Thus, the Shenwu dynasty's army could only choose to retreat and defend the cities, leaving large areas of wilderness and villages to the Frost Mirror barbarian troops. However, even though most of the cities in the Central Plains were much more prosperous than the small cities in the north, their defensive capabilities couldn't be compared. They couldn't withstand the attacks of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Frost Mirror barbarian troops. Almost every now and then, news of a city falling would reach the imperial capital. A group of aristocratic family heads, sect disciples, and nobles were all cowering in the temporarily safe imperial capital, trembling in fear. Although the Shenwu dynasty's imperial capital seemed to be absolutely safe for the time being, even the monarch, Lei Qiuxing, was aware of the problem. As the instigators, how could they not know how much the imperial army in charge of protecting the imperial capital had been corrupted by them? It would be safer for them to go up and fight against the ferocious Shuangjian barbarian troops rather than rely on those young masters to climb up the city walls and fight against the ferocious Shuangjian barbarian troops. In an instant, the entire imperial capital was covered in a gloomy cloud of gloom. According to the style of these aristocratic families, they didn't care about anything other than their own land. If not for the fact that Lei Qiuxing was a powerful and tyrannical monarch, some people would have already begun to force Lei Qiuxing to give up large amounts of territory and recall the border troops to resist the Shuangjian barbarian troops. As for the consequences of doing so, they didn't care and didn't want to care. In any case, dying a few years later was better than dying now. I wonder what the situation is like in the north. A commander of the Blood Liao cavalry carefully wiped his blood-stained scimitar clean on an animal skin before slowly sheathing it. Behind him were countless ferocious Blood Liao knights, as well as an even larger number of disheveled, and demoralized slave soldiers. In front of them was a burning city. Judging from the tall and wide walls, this city definitely had a high status in the Central Plains. However, not only did this rich city fail to stop the Frost Mirror barbarians' advance, it only served to increase their desire to plunder. After all, even though the Shenwu dynasty might not be as rich as the entire Shuangjian dynasty, a city in the Shenwu dynasty was definitely richer than a tribe in the Frost Mirror Prairie. Even the Frost Mirror Khan's Blood Liao tribe was no exception. These Frost Mirror barbarian who had entered the Central Plains were living a much better life than their compatriots in the north. They ate until their mouths were full of oil, and they continued to collect large amounts of wealth. Once the higher-ups gave the order to retreat, they could leave at any time. With the wealth they plundered, they could at least raise the strength of the entire tribe by 2 levels. In addition, the public opinion that Lin Yuan had carefully created also exploded at this moment. Almost all the people believed that the border army had already been defeated. Otherwise, it would be impossible for so many barbarians from the northern frontier to enter the Central Plains. Many people didn't even wait for the Frost Mirror barbarian to continue moving south. They had already spontaneously started migrating further south. This move was absolutely fatal to the current Shenwu dynasty. The north was already out of control, and the south was in endless chaos. If even the people in the Central Plains fled, it would mean that the Shenwu dynasty wouldn't receive a single grain tax in the coming year. Apart from shamelessly asking for peace with Lin Yuan and acknowledging his control over the north, they could only earn resources through the sea trade route in the south. Otherwise, they would all have nothing to eat next year. Lei Qiuxing had no choice but to order officials at all levels to appease the people. At the same time, the border army in the north was on full alert to resist the Shuangjian barbarian reinforcements with all their might. The situation in the Central Plains was indeed stabilized in a short period of time. At the very least, the number of Frost Mirror barbarian troops no longer increased. After the supply line was cut off, they were no longer as difficult to deal with as before. With the garrisons in each city, they could still hold on for a while. At the very least, the situation in the Central Plains would not happen again. But at the same time, they had also blocked the Frost Mirror barbarians' path to invade the northern frontier. This immediately reduced the pressure on the northern frontier. And the Frost Mirror barbarian invaders were right to complain about their allies, because it was the Shenwu dynasty that had cut off their supply line. There was no other way. After all, the place where the barbarians invaded was the source of the Wei River. If the defense line in the north remained open, these barbarians could cross the Wei River and enter the Central Plains at any time. Therefore, if they wanted to stop the Frost Mirror barbarians' attack, they couldn't leave any openings. This time, it could be said that Lei Qiusheng had shot himself in the foot. Not only did he not cause the northern region to be unable to recover from this setback, but he had also suffered enough. Every day, he had a sickly look on his face and did not even attend court if he could. After all, once the officials gathered, there would always be an imperial censor who would come out to question him. Why were the 700,000 Frost Mirror barbarian able to bypass the border army's defenses and plunder the Central Plains? Why did the Shenwu dynasty suffer such heavy losses? Why didn't they send out a decent army to win 2 battles to vent their anger? Of course, Lei Qiusheng wouldn't say that this was a plan he had prepared to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First, he could let the Frost Mirror barbarian invade the north and delay Lin Yuan's annexation of the north. This would give him enough time to pacify the south or mobilize his troops to fight the northern frontier. In addition, Lei Qiusheng had previously used his connections to transfer a group of Blood Liao knights into the northern frontier. It was as if a knife was hanging over his head. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to reorganize the northern defense line and get rid of all the generals who were close to Lei Qiusheng in one fell swoop before replacing them with trusted subordinates. But he didn't expect the Shuangjin barbarian to do this repeatedly. Not only did he want to attack the north, he didn't even let off his ally. After all, Lei Qiusheng couldn't announce that all this was because of his own mistakes, could he? In that case, how could he still be the emperor? Moreover, as a political expert, Lei Qiusheng could naturally see the real side of the matter from the layers of appearances. For example, the seemingly sharp questions of the imperial censor were actually just a prelude. Once the time was right, those aristocratic families would force him to cede a large amount of land to the Shuangjin dynasty and the Qinjiang dynasty in exchange for peace. Anyway, the one who would lose was the Shenwu dynasty, not the aristocratic families. Now that the Shenwu dynasty was in danger, if they continued to support Lei Qiusheng to fight on 2 fronts, and at the same time become enemies with the northern frontier, the inheritance of the aristocratic families that had been passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years would be destroyed in their hands. Of course, after this main goal was achieved, they would propose to withdraw the troops in various regions. It seemed that they wanted to reduce the expenditure of the national treasury, but in fact, they wanted Lei Qiusheng to disperse his cultivation and gradually lose the ability to suppress the aristocratic family's troops. Chapter 498. This was the main reason why Lei Qiusheng detested the aristocratic families. Lin Yuan was thinking of ways to eliminate different voices at the northern frontier. However, within the Shenwu dynasty, various factions were thinking of ways to weaken Lei Qiusheng's power. They didn't seek to pull Lei Qiusheng down from the throne, but at least they wanted to prevent Lei Qiusheng from killing them as he wished. Of course, people were greedy and insatiable. Once they weakened Lei Qiusheng's power step by step, the next thing they would do would be to covet the sacred artifacts and experience the feeling of taking turns to be the emperor. Lei Qiusheng was even a little envious of Lin Yuan. Although the northern frontier wasn't big, after a series of purges and suppression, the entire northern frontier was under Lin Yuan's control. If he wanted to fight a war, it would be fought. If he wanted to fight a war, it would be fought for as long as he wanted. No one dared to say anything. This was because the aristocratic families in the northern frontier were relying on Lin Yuan to survive. Once Lin Yuan fell from power, the entire northern frontier would be weakened and destroyed. This kind of method of attaching an entire force to a single person was extremely stupid. Once there was no outstanding successor, then the speed of the force's growth would be the same as the speed of its collapse. Lei Qiusheng knew that this method was stupid, but he still dreamed of becoming such an emperor. However, he was helpless. Back then, he was able to ascend to the throne by relying on his military power. However, with the abilities of those big shots, it was impossible for them to govern the region. Therefore, he could only use a large number of talents from the aristocratic families and sections. This resulted in the current situation where he couldn't get rid of his subordinates. Zhang Xiu, Lei Qiusheng, who was pacing back and forth in Yangxin Palace Hall, subconsciously called out. However, a trace of sadness quickly appeared on Lei Qiusheng's face. That person was no longer here. Actually, putting aside the fact that he was a surviving member of the Jiao clan, Zhang Xiu had done his best under Lei Qiusheng. He had managed the embroidered guard from nothing to a ferocious tiger that everyone feared. Although it couldn't be separated from Lei Qiusheng's great support behind him, it was enough to show that Zhang Xiu wasn't an embroidered pillow like Lin Yuan had described him to be. On the contrary, Zhang Xiu was a great talent with real talent. Moreover, after decades of getting along with each other, the stubborn Lei Qiusheng had also treated Zhang Xiu as one of his few friends. Although they were not as close as Shadow, who had grown up together, they were still closer than Lei Qiuming. Now that there was a problem with the war strategy, Lei Qiusheng sadly discovered that he couldn't even find someone to discuss it with. After a while, Lei Qiusheng walked out of Yangxin Palace Hall with bloodshot eyes and strode to the Yamen of the Servants' Administration. "Greetings, Your Majesty." The Servants' Administration wasn't just one of the two intelligence agencies in Lei Qiusheng's hands. It was also a place that trained eunuchs and palace maids to serve the imperial family, nobles, and even high-ranking officials. For people born in this place, they had to remember the faces of even the students who had passed the imperial examinations but hadn't had the chance to be promoted. How could they be blind when facing Lei Qiusheng, the ruler of a country? Lei Qiusheng waved his hand, indicating for the eunuchs and palace maids to stand up. At the same time he asked, "Where is my Xin Linju now? How long will it take for him to return?" However, the response to Lei Qiusheng was a deathly silence. Suddenly, Lei Qiusheng's heart skipped a beat. There was even a hint of panic on his face. As his trump card, Xin Linjun's importance to him was self-evident. If something happened to Xin Linjun, not to mention the covetous eyes of the two empires, even Lin Yuan could step on his head and abuse his power. "Speak!" Lei Qiusheng fiercely stomped his foot, shattering a white jade tile as he roared in annoyance. An old eunuch with snow-white hair trembled as he knelt on the ground. He said bitterly, "Your Majesty, after Xin Linjun received Your Majesty's decree, he was stopped by Eunuch Tai before he could leave. I'm afraid he won't be able to return in a short period of time." Hearing that his shadow had left Xin Linjun in the south at such a time of crisis, Lei Qiusheng's face didn't reveal any strange expression. However, his heart grew heavier and heavier. This was because the Shadow's action meant that there was an even bigger mess in the south. It was no longer a problem that could be solved by killing Lei Qiusheng or wiping out a few aristocratic families. The old eunuch quietly raised his head. When he saw that Lei Qiusheng hadn't delivered the goods, he lowered his head again and said, "According to the news that Eunuch Tai sent a while ago, those evil cultists who were banished overseas have now returned to the south to preach. Currently, a large number of people have already joined them." Eunuch Tai said that there are countless rebel armies in the south. "There is no army that can be trusted. Only Xin Linjun, who is loyal to Your Majesty to the death, can take on this great responsibility and eliminate those evil cultists." Evil disciple. The moment these three words appeared, Lei Qiusheng only felt that his brain had exploded with a buzzing sound. His vision instantly turned white. As the actual ruler of the Shenwu dynasty, he knew too many secrets that others didn't know. He was very clear that the top forces who called themselves the Guardians of the Heavenly Gates were mortal enemies with these evil cultists. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that both sides had an irreconcilable hatred. They definitely wouldn't sit by and watch the evil cultists develop and grow stronger in the south. They wouldn't even let them enter the south. But now, not only had the evil cultists entered the south, they had even started to preach in the south. No one had come out to control them. Even the shadow had no choice but to disobey Lei Qiusheng's orders and intercept Shen Linjun. He was prepared to let them take on the responsibility of eliminating the evil cultists at any time. However, the attitude of the guardians of the heavenly gates had already explained many things. Since they could tolerate the evil cultists preaching in the south, it meant that they were willing to make almost any concessions other than directly sending troops to suppress the Shenwu dynasty. Heh, heh, Lei Qiusheng opened his mouth and laughed bitterly. The sound coming from his throat was like a broken bellows. Your Majesty, the old eunuch raised his head with a worried expression. He looked at Lei Qiusheng, who had changed his usual shrewd style. He felt as if he was being chased, and his heart was tightly clenched. After all, these eunuchs grew up and learned in the palace. Their loyalty to Lei Qiusheng was definitely no less than that of Shen Linjun. It might even surpass that of Shen Linjun. After all, Shen Linjun was a professional soldier. He could still live well without Lei Qiusheng. Even if he retired and went to a remote city to be a demon slayer or a mercenary, he could still live a good life. However, these eunuchs were different. Without Lei Qiusheng, they were just a group of lonely disabled people with no one to rely on. Even if their cultivation was high and their wealth was comparable to that of a country, they would still end up with no one to send them off in their old age. Their power, their lives, and even their everything were linked to Lei Qiusheng. Naturally, they had to think about Lei Qiusheng at all times. Chapter 499. This humble one is doing very well. Lei Qiusheng finally regained some clarity after hearing the old eunuch's call. However, he felt an inexplicable sadness in his heart. No matter how he viewed himself, the current rotten situation had become a mess that was difficult for him to clean up. This was especially true after Lin Yuan revealed his ambitions. Lei Qiusheng was in a state of panic and had taken many remedial measures. However, the more he did, the more mistakes he made, which led to the current situation. Even though Lei Qiusheng knew that as long as he had enough time to deal with the south, even if Lin Yuan completely took over the north, he would still have the strength to fight. However, the enormous pressure that had been accumulating in his heart day after day made Lei Qiusheng, blinded by greed, choose to open the border. He gritted his teeth and let the Frost Mirror Barbarian into the country, but he didn't expect that he would shoot himself in the foot. His originally resentful attitude completely changed after hearing the news of the southern evil cultists. He originally only treated Lin Yuan as an equal opponent, but he didn't expect that Lin Yuan's plans were even greater than his. The cultists had even bypassed him and directly contacted the most powerful forces. If the shadow had not happened to be in the south, it was likely that the cultists would have caused a huge ruckus before the report would appear on the shadow's desk. Because at this moment, Lei Qiusheng clearly understood that it wasn't just Lin Yuan. Even the civil and military officials of the court, as well as the top-level factions, all thought of him as the loser before the war even began. None of you are optimistic about this humble one's chances? This humble one is going to win this war no matter what. Lei Qiusheng suddenly took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Eunuch Shua, this humble one doesn't have any trustworthy people by his side right now. I can only trouble the servants' administration to make a trip to the northern border. Have the troops there withdraw in batches to the central plains and defend the imperial capital to the death. Without this humble one's orders, no one is allowed to fight on their own. Those who disobey will have their entire family executed. The old eunuch called, Eunuch was shaken. He looked at Lei Qiusheng in disbelief, as if this was the first time he had met this person. I am very clear-headed now. I know the consequences of doing so. Lei Qiusheng gritted his teeth and fiercely said, Didn't they look down on me? They want this humble one's beautiful country, but this humble one will not give it to them. Even if they are lucky enough to beat this humble one this time, this humble one will leave them with a terrible mess. Yes. Eunuch Shua lowered his head again and pressed his forehead against the ground, trying to control his emotions. He wasn't sure what Lei Qiusheng was feeling right now, but he was sure that Lei Qiusheng wasn't clear-headed at the moment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a decision that harmed others without benefiting himself. He wouldn't have chosen to give up on all his plans at this time. However, eunuch Zhou did not have eunuch Tai's cultivation, nor did he have Zhang Xiu's forbearance, nor did he have Li Zhong's wisdom. He was just a loyal official, a foolish loyal official. Thus, even though he knew that Lei Qiusheng's decision was wrong, eunuch Zhou did not speak up to dissuade him. On the frost mirror grassland far away from the Shenwu dynasty, in the royal tent of the Xueliao tribe, a man who seemed to be in his 30s was holding a book in his left hand and a white stone in his right. His brows were furrowed as he sat in the tent in deep thought. But he was the only person in the tent. No one knew who he was playing Go with or what he was thinking about. The man's skin was white and delicate, as smooth as milk. He didn't seem like a child of the grassland who had been tempered by the sun and wind day and night. Instead, he seemed like one of those scholarly Confucian disciples from the south of the Shenwu dynasty. He even wore a moon-white brocade robe, the style of which had been popular in the Shenwu dynasty last year. However, the material used was even more luxurious and expensive than the vast majority of high-class cloth shops. One could tell at a glance that it was no ordinary item. Even more inconceivable was that the book in the man's hand was not some incomprehensible Go manual, nor was it a Confucian classic. Instead, it was a book that could be seen everywhere on the northern frontier and that no one dared to disobey. The new laws of the northern frontier. Third Prince, the Blood Eagle has sent back a message. A frost mirror barbarian wearing a leather coat and iron armor placed a stack of parchment in front of the man. Without waiting for him to speak, the frost mirror barbarian cupped his fists and left the tent. The man acted as if he hadn't heard anything. His brows were still furrowed as he pondered for an incense stick's worth of time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he gently placed the white stone in his hand on the chessboard. The entire chessboard instantly came to life. The white stone that had been in a disadvantageous position suddenly twisted and turned into a killing move. At this point, the man finally put down the book in his hand. He stood up and walked to a copper basin to wash his hands with water. Then, he used a piece of dry animal skin to wipe the water off his hands. Only then did he return to his soft couch and sit down. He picked up the stack of parchment and began to read. It wasn't until he finished reading the last parchment that the man slowly exhaled and murmured, "He's gone mad." The Blood Eagle was an intelligence agency that he had set up himself. However, Frost Mirror Barbarian wasn't good at intelligence. Even if he disguised himself, his skin and demeanor were completely different from those who lived in a world where birds sang and flowers bloomed. Therefore, there were very few secret agents and spies in the Shuangjian dynasty. Even if there were a few similar organizations, they were short-lived. They were either destroyed in an instant or slowly fell into a useless state. Even though his Blood Eagle could hide in the Shenwu dynasty, it still couldn't obtain first-hand information. This was also the reason why he could slowly think of a way to solve the chessboard after receiving the information about the Shenwu dynasty. However, based on this outdated information, he could draw several conclusions. Firstly, his valiant 13th brother was already confirmed dead. Second, the strength of the northern frontier was far beyond their imagination. It was estimated that none of the people who entered the north this time could come out. Third, Lei Qiusheng had gone mad. The first two pieces of information were already speculated by him. Even if they were confirmed now, they weren't worth mentioning. However, the last piece of information made him cautious. In addition to the information he received this morning, Lei Qiusheng was going to withdraw the border army in the north and let them directly enter the rich and livable hinterland of the Shenwu dynasty to occupy territory and plunder treasures. In other words, Lei Qiusheng was going to use the entire Shuangjian dynasty as a knife and let them be the executioners whose hands were stained with blood. For Lei Qiusheng would get rid of all the major problems and directly reshuffle the power structure of the entire Shenwu dynasty. But what if he's not mad? The third prince's eyebrows, which had just relaxed, were tightly knitted together again. His expression was a little uncertain. He dared to use the Shuangjian dynasty as a knife. Wasn't he afraid that it was easier to invite the devil than to send the devil away? Chapter 500. The third prince sat in his own tent and frowned as he pondered. After a while, he realized that something was not right. How did Lei Qiusheng end up like this? It was because the Qingjiang Empire and Shuangjin Empire had joined forces with the Hengduan Mountains and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas to attack the Shenwu dynasty at the same time. As a result, even the basic garrison troops were transferred to the front line. Although the front line looked stable, the interior was as soft as mud. Not to mention the Northern Frontier King and the Qingping King, even the rebels could threaten Lei Qiusheng's position. However, why would the four forces join forces to attack the Shenwu dynasty? With the third prince's wisdom that did not match that of the people in the grassland, he quickly thought of the top forces that were above the empire. It was obvious that Lei Qiusheng had offended one of the top forces because of something. That was why there was a war everywhere, giving the aristocratic families and sects who coveted the high position space to cause trouble. After joining forces with Lei Qiusheng, the situation gradually became clear. The thing that made the top forces hate the Shenwu dynasty so much that they used all their influence to make the four forces join forces should still be in Lei Qiusheng's hands. Otherwise, both the Shuangjin Empire and the Qingjiang Empire would have withdrawn their troops and returned to the empire. After all, the monster horde in the Hengduan Mountains would not reason with them. Since they had no military strength, the neighboring empires would not miss this opportunity to loot a burning house. However, the strange thing was that the forces that bordered the Qingjiang Empire and the Shuangjin Empire did not attack them at all. It was only after they attacked the northern frontier that the monster horde broke out on the Shuangjin grassland again. All the signs pointed to the fact that the item was still in Lei Qiusheng's hands. Also, the reason why he dared to take the risk was that the item could help him turn the tables after his plan of driving the wolves to devour the tigers. He could destroy the Frost Mirror cavalry that invaded the Shenwu dynasty. Thinking of this, the third prince's forehead was instantly covered in a fine layer of cold sweat. Shakily standing up from his soft couch, the third prince walked step by step towards the door of the tent. This was not because his body was weak. On the contrary, the fact that he was able to maintain his fair and smooth skin on the Frost Mirror grassland was not because he was talented. Rather, it was because the third prince had cultivated at a terrifying speed since he was a child. He was only in his 30s, but he had already reached the Heaven Star realm. With his stellar energy protecting his body, he was naturally impervious to the cold wind. In terms of cultivation alone, the third prince was probably the strongest of the Frost Mirror Khagan's many sons. Unfortunately, leading an army into battle did not depend on the cultivation of the general. There were many other factors that had to be considered. Although the third prince was not inferior to the 13th prince in terms of strategy and adaptability, the third prince was not inferior to the 13th prince in terms of motivation, morale, and courage. Therefore, the 13th prince was Bataloo, and the third prince was just the third prince. Your Highness, why are you? The two Bloodspan knights in charge of guarding the tent paled when they saw the third prince walk out of the tent. On the Frost Mirror grassland, where the 13th prince's fate was unknown, the third prince could not become the first successor of the Bloodspan tribe. However, the cunning third prince controlled the Blood Eagles. With the cunning of a fox and the eyes of an eagle, the third prince was practically the brain of the entire Bloodspan tribe. He spent most of his time in his tent, processing the intelligence reports from the Blood Eagles and formulating a plan of action for the Bloodspan tribe. Unless something major was about to happen, the third prince rarely left his tent. After all, the intelligence reports were already outdated. If he did not check them in time and did not react in time, the entire tribe might be plunged into an unknown and desperate situation that concerned the survival of the tribe. The third prince looked at the guards with a pale face and said in a low voice, "This matter is of great importance. It is not convenient for me to meet with my father directly. I can only trouble you to go first and tell my father that no matter what he is doing, he is to postpone everything and wait for me. Just say that our Reflection Frost dynasty is in grave danger. If we don't handle this matter properly, not only the Bloodbath tribe, but all the other tribes on the Reflection Frost plains will be wiped out." What a guy! When the guards heard this, their faces instantly paled. The third prince never spoke without thinking. Now that he said this, it meant that a great disaster was about to happen on the Frost Mirror grassland. The guards did not know that the exhausted Shenwu dynasty would not be able to stop the Shuangjin dynasty from taking the imperial capital now that the army had moved out in full force. However, the third prince was never one to speak empty words. Many people even respected the third prince with titles such as prophet or sage. This was because the things that the third prince had predicted over the past 10 years were all reflected in the time and place that he had predicted. Yes, I will go and see the great Khan now. After all, the third prince's guards were the brains of the Bloodspan tribe. Although they only had the title of a guard, their status was not inferior to the generals other than the princes. As long as they reported to the great Khan, they would be able to see him. Also, the third prince turned to look in the direction of the Shenwu dynasty and said with a dark face, "We have to be prepared for both sides. My father has always favored the 13th prince, but it seems that he has died on the northern frontier. I am worried that my father will send troops out in anger and destroy all the tribes on the Frost Mirror grassland. Find a group of trustworthy people and inform the chiefs of the other tribes to come here for a meeting. Even if we have to force him, we cannot let my father continue this war." The guard trembled and his face paled, but his eyes flashed with determination. He said in a low voice, "Yes." Everyone knew that Shuangjin Khan favored the 13th prince. However, they were both Shuangjin Khan's sons. How could the third prince, who was the most talented and the wisest, not be interested in Shuangjin Khan's throne? If he succeeded in forcing the third prince to abdicate this time, he would have succeeded the third prince. As long as he could win this war, he would be a big shot in the Bloodspan tribe and even in the Shuangjin dynasty. When the time came, the third prince might even allow him to leave with his tribesmen and establish his own tribe. For a better life in the future, for a lord who could rule over a region. It was a gamble. The third prince, who did not know the guard's complicated thoughts, sighed as he watched the guard leave. He looked in the direction of the Shenwu dynasty and murmured, "I hope it is not too late." Chapter 501. If the Shuangjin dynasty could get their hands on information, the northern frontier would naturally be able to get their hands on it. In fact, they would be able to get their hands on it much faster. Looking at the report on the table that had been confirmed by the Association of the Demon Emperor and the Embroidered Uniform Guard, Li Zhong's eyes were filled with doubt. Was Lei Qiusheng crazy, or was he making a huge gamble? Or was he trying to drag the northern frontier down with him? Li Zhong believed that a person at Lei Qiusheng's level wouldn't lose their will to fight just because of a momentary loss. He also didn't believe that Lei Qiusheng would make such a crazy decision. If that was the case, then he would have to wonder if the person who had invaded the country with a strong army was the current divine martial emperor Lei Qiusheng. Once the northern frontier army retreats back to the central plains, the Frost Mirror cavalry will be able to attack the Shenwu dynasty unscrupulously. Of course, they might also attack our northern frontier. Judging from the factors of this simultaneous invasion, the Shuangjin dynasty's tribes, big and small, should be more inclined to plunder the Shenwu dynasty, which is currently lacking in battle strength. However, the disappearance of the 13th prince will cause the Frost Mirror Khan to target the northern frontier. Lei Qiusheng's seemingly crazy move has hit the nail on the head. If we go to stop the Shuangjin dynasty, we will have to split off our already small forces to take over the defense line left behind by the Shenwu dynasty's frontier army. Not only will it be a waste of effort, but it will also be easy for Lei Qiusheng to attack us. However, if we don't stop the Shuangjin dynasty, we will have to face the most elite Shuai Liao cavalry. Without the Shuai Liao knights who could contend against the divine martial Chongbu, with the strength of the Shenwu dynasty's border army and Lei Qiusheng's plans, it would be more than enough to defeat the Shuangjin dynasty's invasion. When the time came, Lei Qiusheng would be able to reverse his decline and rebuild the morale of the army. Then he would be able to find an opportunity to fight us head-on. Right now, the northern frontier's strength is barely enough to deal with Lei Qiusheng, who has recovered 50% of his strength. Add to that the Blood Liao Knight's attack, and we can't mobilize more than 30% of our troops. Unless Uncle Gao's defensive fortifications along the river are miraculous, Lei Qiusheng will be able to catch his breath and kill us with a single punch." Li Zhong muttered to himself. His eyes gradually regained their clarity. He said coldly, "What a Lei Qiusheng!" Everyone's wisdom was different, and the level at which they looked at problems was also different. Eunuch Zhuo was on the first level, and he could only see the harm of Lei Qiusheng's move. The third prince was on the second level, and he could see the harm of Lei Qiusheng's move. He could also see the benefits from it and derive a series of calculations. Li Zhong was on the third level, and he directly eliminated the areas that were harmful to the Shenwu dynasty. He found the most crucial point and even used it to deduce the unfavorable situation the northern frontier would soon face. As for which level Lei Qiusheng was on, perhaps only he himself knew. When an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Lei Qiusheng had chosen between the north and the south to survive. On one hand, he catered to the north to force the south, but on the other hand, he was worried that the north would become too powerful and difficult to control in the future. Under this kind of worrying situation, no matter how good a card he played, it would be a lousy one. It would be very easy for Li Zhong, Lin Yuan, and other people with great wisdom to find the flaws, and then break his killing moves one by one and counterattack. Even at this point, not only had Lei Qiusheng not solved the trouble in the south, he had not even mobilized Lei Qiusheng and the rebel army in the south. If not for Lin Yuan's tit-for-tat by letting the cultists land in the south, perhaps the south would still be stable and waiting for Lei Qiusheng to be forced into a corner by the northern frontier. At that time, no matter what conditions the aristocratic families in the south offered, Lei Qiusheng would have to pinch his nose and accept them, and the scales of victory would begin to tilt towards the interest groups in the south. At that point, whether it was Lei Qiusheng or Lin Yuan, they would both become losers. It was just a matter of who would lose more in the end. But at the moment when he was completely on the verge of defeat, Lei Qiusheng was able to sweep away all his worries and boldly adopt the method of no construction without destruction to meet the attack of the northern frontier. Moreover, he changed his previous scheming attitude and chose to use an open and above-board scheme. He made the Shuangjin dynasty his butcher's knife. While suppressing the northern frontier and sweeping away the aristocratic families in the central plains, he concentrated his forces to defend the imperial city and the nearby territories. With the Shuangjin barbarians' fighting style of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, he was bound to bypass the imperial city, which was a fat piece of meat, and directly sweep through the territory of the interest groups in the south. The cultists, the Frost Mirror Barbarian, and the interest groups in the south would first fight each other, and then Lei Qiusheng would suddenly close the door and beat the dogs, directly eliminating all the internal problems. Even the aristocratic families that gave him a headache were swept away by the Shuangjin Barbarian. How many of them would be left unharmed? How many of them would dare to challenge Lei Qiusheng? How could he count on the aristocratic families near the imperial city that Lei Qiusheng was toying with? Moreover, the Shuangjin barbarian would not continue to attack the Shenwu dynasty. Instead, they would retreat to the Frost Mirror grasslands to lick their wounds. At that time, if the northern frontier still could not deal with the problem of the Blood Liao Knights, it would be a huge joke. Should he take this move or not? For the first time, Li Zhong felt that the wisdom he was so proud of was actually useless at this moment. He realized that compared to ambitious and ruthless characters like Lei Qiusheng and Lin Yuan, he lacked the most crucial thing, courage. He did not want to waste his energy fighting the Shuangjin dynasty, but he also did not want to take the risk of Lei Qiusheng rebuilding his confidence. At this moment, he did not know what to do. "Your Highness, battle report." A guard strode into Li Zhong's office and placed a battle report on Li Zhong's desk. Li Zhong tore open the wax seal on the envelope and took out the letter. His face immediately turned ashen as if he had eaten a fly. While he was still making preparations, Lei Qiusheng had already begun to move. At present, most of the northern border army had been wiped out, and the rest were fighting as they retreated toward the central plains. After all, these border armies had been stationed at the border for many years and had encountered the barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty more than once or twice in the wilderness. While they might not be evenly matched, they would not be routed so quickly. This is troublesome. This is really troublesome. Li Zhong felt his temples throbbing with pain. Lei Qiusheng had actually played a dirty trick right in front of them. According to Li Zhong's usual logic, Lei Qiusheng's orders would be delivered to the border by trusted officials, and then the border army commanders would have to verify the authenticity of the orders before destroying the fortifications and slowly retreating to the vicinity of the imperial capital. But just as he received news that Lei Qiusheng was cutting off all means of retreat, the border army had already moved. What did this mean? It meant that Lei Qiusheng had given the Northern Frontier Intelligence Agency a vicious slap to the face. Chapter 502. Lei Qiusheng's order had already bypassed the intelligence system of the Northern Frontier and reached the border army. He pretended to be in the servants' administration just to confuse the intelligence agency of the Northern Frontier. He wanted Li Zhong and the others to think about it for a while when they received the message. Then he would take advantage of the time to mobilize the border army. In this way, no matter how fast the Northern Frontier's response was, it would be a joke. Because the border army had started to retreat in an orderly manner. Could the Northern Frontier attack the border army under the pressure of the Shuangjian barbarian and cut off their retreat? If the Northern Frontier really had that kind of strength, how could they be forced to this step? At the same time, it was also a challenge. How many troops do we have left? Li Zhong looked up at the guard who didn't have time to retreat, looking very gloomy. The guard thought for a while and said bitterly, "The main force of the southern expedition is in the border army to carry out the plan of the Great Wall. Some of them are in the north to clean up the rebels or to entangle the Frost Mirror barbarian who got separated from the main force. The Falling Star Army is now surveying the terrain near Wei River City, preparing to build a position to resist the naval attack of the Shenwu dynasty. The Subhuman Army is fighting with the demon beasts, so some of them are scattered in the forests. It's hard to gather them in a short time. If Your Highness wants to mobilize the troops as soon as possible, only the Northern Army hasn't been mobilized yet." Li Zhong was now a criminal. Without Lin Yuan's permission, the 100,000 guards of the prince's mansion were not allowed to leave Shunning City. They had already made a mistake once. If they made another mistake, no matter how good Li Zhong's reputation was, no one would be able to keep his head. Luckily, the Northern Army in the Northern Frontier could be mobilized though the guards couldn't be mobilized. Li Zhong thought for a while and scolded with a smile. Mobilize the Northern Army? Then it's better not to do anything. The Northern Battlefront Army, which had just been expanded twice, was disbanded recently. Those experienced soldiers were all sent to the front line. Even the soldiers we lost in the rebellion of the 3 cities were sent from the Northern Battlefront Army. Do you think they still have people? Well, the guard touched his head and smiled. Even so, they are one of the 3 armies in the Northern Frontier. They can spare 100,000 soldiers, can't they? Your Highness, you think too much. He could tell that this prince didn't care about his own life at all. He knew that this was a job that would cost him his head, but he still wanted to take the 100,000 guards out and wrestle with the border troops of the Shenwu dynasty who had retreated back to the Central Plains. Li Zhong shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. The Northern Army can't even gather 600,000 soldiers, and they have to be stationed in different places in the Northern Frontier. It's a chaotic time. Who knows how many demons and monsters are going to cause trouble? Almost all the Bright Gown Guards are going to fight with the army. The local troops and the Association of Demon Kings can't suppress the Northern Frontier. Besides, Li Zhong stopped abruptly. He waved his hand and said, "Anyway, the Northern Army can't be mobilized. Within 4 hours, you have to bring me at least 100,000 soldiers. Otherwise, the guards of the royal palace will go out to fight. Even if we can't kill all the border army of the Shenwu dynasty, we have to try our best to wipe them out." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Zhong's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. Some words couldn't be heard by a mere guard. The northern frontier wasn't a paradise where everyone was united. There was a lot of blood hidden under the peaceful land. Various factions wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to fight for enough benefits for themselves. Although they had all given up on the position of the actual ruler under Lin Yuan, this did not mean that they were pure of heart and did not care about anything. It was like the aristocratic families that depended on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to survive. How could the Qiao family and the Shui family be compared with the other aristocratic families? Although the forces that depended on the northern frontier were controlled by the factions and wouldn't think about being the leader, they would take this opportunity to suppress and scheme against each other because of their irreconcilable hatred. Even if they were punished afterwards, they would still do it. These actions were the same as the forces that rebelled in the Shenwu dynasty. It was just that they didn't have the resources and strength to stand on their own in the northern frontier. They could only drag down the forces of the other factions and try their best to eliminate more forces to increase their own speaking rights. Usually, the northern frontier looked peaceful on the surface. However, at this critical moment, no one could be sure whether they were loyal or not. Li Zhong didn't know who he could trust. He could only let them work together according to their original factions and try his best to avoid infighting. However, there were some ticking time bombs that he had to guard against. For example, Zhang Qilin. The guard had a bitter expression on his face. He could only helplessly accept this task before turning around and leaving the office. He didn't have as many misgivings as Li Zhong. Naturally, he didn't have as many worries as Li Zhong. However, Li Zhong was now their master. Once Li Zhong fell from power, they could forget about having good days in the future. I really envy you guys. You don't have to think so much. Li Zhong looked at the guard who was gradually walking away and shook his head with a bitter smile. However, a moment later, Li Zhong's face returned to its cold and indifferent expression. However, a trace of madness appeared in his eyes. Didn't you, Lei Qiuxing, want to play an open scheme with us and turn the area around the imperial capital into a place where anyone who touches you will have to stab their hands with blood? This old man doesn't believe in this evil. While you're organizing a defensive position, this old man will do his best to eliminate the effective forces in your hands and let those Shuangjin barbarian people bleed first. Let's see if you can still sit still on the fishing platform. Li Zhong's strategy wasn't weak. However, he didn't have Lei Qiuxing's boldness. However, this didn't matter. Even a rabbit would bite when cornered. If he couldn't find a way to deal with Lei Qiuxing's open scheme with his own courage, then he might as well give up on his reasoning and use an absolutely bold and crazy strategy. In any case, Lei Qiuxing dared to act as if he was going to drag the northern frontier down with him. How could the northern frontier not dare to accept this? However, on the surface, Lei Qiuxing wanted to drag the northern frontier down with him. However, he still had a trump card in his hands. It didn't matter even if he didn't achieve the desired effect. In any case, Lei Qiuxing was extremely confident that he would still be the ruler of the Shenwu dynasty. He wouldn't become a speck of dust in the long river of history because of a small disturbance. However, Li Zhong's crazy response was just a risky move. To put it bluntly, it was just a bluff. In his heart, he really did have some thoughts of dragging Lei Qiuxing down with him. Chapter 503. But it doesn't matter. After all, I still have the Dragon King behind me. The madness in Li Zhong's eyes gradually subsided. Lei Qiuxing had some unknown trump cards in his hands, but how could Li Zhong not have any trump cards in his hands? The situation had already become so dangerous, but Lin Yuan didn't show any signs of panic. He didn't even have the intention to recall the army in the south back to the northern frontier to fight together. That must be because Lin Yuan still had other cards that he hadn't played yet. Li Zhong knew his position, so he also knew that no matter how much power Lin Yuan gave him, he was still a puppet. And no matter how much a puppet struggled, it was still within the scope of Lin Yuan's ability. As long as Li Zhong wasn't stupid enough to cancel Lin Yuan's original arrangements and order all the troops in the northern frontier to die, then Lin Yuan would still be able to clean up the situation. There was indeed only one ruler in the northern frontier, but Li Zhong, as the king of the northern frontier, still had a lot of power in his hands. In addition, Lin Yuan deliberately molded Li Zhong into a positive figure who always thought for the common people. Anything that was beneficial to the people in the northern frontier would be credited to Li Zhong. The dirty work was basically done by people like Luo Su, Sherdong, and Xia Siyu. This was because Lin Yuan was very clear that the law of the jungle could be absolutely observed in the Hengduan Mountains. But outside the Hengduan Mountains, when dealing with these people, he had to consider everyone's feelings from all aspects. For example, those capable officials who had real talent, hated war, and could really bring benefits to a region would definitely not be willing to serve under a warmonger like Lin Yuan. After all, Lin Yuan's actions were completely different from the ideals they had molded since childhood. Naturally, they wouldn't favor him, but the development of the northern frontier couldn't be done without them. Therefore, Li Zhong appeared. With Li Zhong as the leader, it was a completely different matter. Not just the people on the northern frontier, even the arrogant sages of the Confucian sect mentioned the reforms on the northern frontier. Even though they knew that they were growing on the corpses of the noble families and sects, they did bring benefits to the people. They even removed the opportunity for the noble families and sects as middlemen to suck the wealth of the people. The people received benefits, and so did the income of the rulers. Therefore, no one could go against their conscience and say that the reform of the northern frontier was a strategy to bring chaos to the country. Even though they all knew that the reforms and laws at the northern frontier were all made by Lin Yuan, the exotic beast, they still couldn't believe it. However, since Lin Yuan wanted to give the credit to Li Zhong, these humans agreed to it. They were willing to be blind and not come out to refute. Naturally, there would be talented people who didn't see the twists and turns in the process who came to the northern frontier. Therefore, Li Zhong's position in the northern frontier was very special. Different from the previous two kings of the northern frontier, although Li Zhong didn't have his own faction, his orders carried much more weight than the previous two kings. This was because he was assigned for Lin Yuan to recruit talents. Even if Li Zhong wanted to die, Lin Yuan had to find a way to protect him. "I hope you won't walk on that path of death." Li Zhong placed his hands behind his back and sighed faintly. The situation at the northern frontier was indeed complicated. However, Zhang Qilin and Shen Linjun, who used to be reserve soldiers, were even more difficult to deal with. These people were 100% loyal to Lei Qiusheng. When Luo Su was teaching Li Zhongxing, Lin Yuan promoted Zhang Qilin and let him lead those people to build the northern army. Therefore, Li Zhongxing was under the subtle influence. His loyalty to Lei Qiusheng was no longer what it used to be. This time, Lei Qiusheng's action of no building without destruction had greatly impacted Li Zhongxing, who had been nurtured in the northern frontier. Therefore, Li Zhongxing, who was far away in the front line, might not be absolutely loyal to Lin Yuan. However, when it came to protecting the people of the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing would spare no effort to complete it. Therefore, the Great Wall plan would never have any mistakes. However, Zhang Qilin, who had been hanging out with those old brothers, wasn't affected by this. These people still maintained absolute loyalty to Lei Qiusheng. Since Lei Qiusheng could bypass the intelligence agencies of the northern frontier and move the border army to retreat under their noses, then it was impossible for him not to bypass their spies and send the secret edict to Zhang Qilin. At this critical moment, it was better to be stabbed by someone from the inside than to fight against those barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty. Li Zhongxing stayed in the northern frontier as a prisoner because he wanted to keep an eye on Zhang Qilin and those old subordinates of Li Zhongxing. However, now that Lei Qiusheng had taken such drastic measures, only an idiot would let those border army soldiers leave. However, if he moved, no one could guarantee that Zhang Qilin wouldn't act rashly. Before this, the northern frontier's troops were all sent from the northern battlefront army. Of course, it wasn't because the soldiers of the northern battlefront army were strong and had good training. It was because Lin Yuan didn't want Zhang Qilin and those reserve soldiers of Shen Linjun to make the northern battlefront army into a private army. That was why he wanted to use this method to scatter those officers of Shen Linjun's reserve soldiers into different troops so that they couldn't cooperate with each other. 2 flowers bloomed, one on each side. Let's not talk about the scheming in the northern frontier for now. Li Zhongxing, who was near Donglin City, wasn't having a good time at the moment. Because of the Xinwu dynasty's border army's retreat, the original barrier naturally didn't exist anymore. Although the Xinwu dynasty's army wouldn't go deep into the northern frontier's territory, they wouldn't come near the border and cause trouble near Donglin City, which was heavily guarded. However, even if the Xinwu dynasty's army didn't come, it didn't mean that the Shuangjian dynasty's barbarians were so sensible. As soon as the border army retreated from the fortifications, the barbarians rushed in impatiently. After all, the border army had been ordered to defend the defensive line for the past few days. Not to mention supplies, even the scouts couldn't penetrate the defensive line. Therefore, the 1.2 million Frost Mirror barbarian from before had completely lost contact with them. Now that things had developed to this point, it wasn't just a matter of the missing 13th prince anymore. If the 150,000 Blood Gold Knights were wiped out here, even Frost Mirror Khan wouldn't be able to stop the decline of the Blood Gold tribe, let alone the 13th prince. If the 1.05 million cavalrymen were also lost, who knew how many tribes would be wiped out this winter? Because of this, the chiefs of the Xinwu dynasty's territory were extremely anxious. They repeatedly ordered the northern frontier to release these warriors even if they had to suffer some losses. Therefore, more and more Frost Mirror barbarian rushed into the Xinwu dynasty's territory like wolves and tigers, urgently wanting to get in touch with the vanguard troops. Chapter 504. Previously, Li Zhongxing had used a different strategy to eliminate the vanguard troops, so he could treat them as if they did not exist. But now that the Great Wall plan was halfway through, if he allowed this large wave of barbarians to pass through, the entire plan would become a joke. Moreover, even if these barbarians were not very smart, it was impossible for them to allow the northern territory to build a defensive fortification that could isolate them from their territory. Damn it, let's go all out. Li Zhongxing unsheathed the long sword at his waist and said fiercely, "Don't panic. Craftsmen, finish your work in an orderly manner. My men will escort you back to the safety of Donglin City in an orderly manner. Leave 5,000 men to guard the craftsmen. The rest of you, follow me and prepare to fight those barbarians." Almost all of the soldiers following Li Zhongxing were the elites of the southern expedition. Apart from the first batch he had brought out, the rest were all veterans who had participated in the encirclement and suppression of the rebel army in the north. Although the quality of their battle was not up to par, they had still been honed on the battlefield. These soldiers naturally exuded the aura of an invincible army. The Shuangjian barbarian army arrived in an instant, but they did not break through the enemy's formation and charge immediately. Instead, they set up camp 15 li away from Donglin City, seemingly intending to engage in a tug-of-war with Li Zhongxing's headquarters. This was the first time the two sides had met. Even the arrogant Shuangjian barbarian army did not dare to be careless at this moment. After all, the 13th prince, 200,000 Blood-Ridge cavalrymen, and 450,000 cavalrymen from various tribes had all been lost in the north. Now that the brothers who had invaded the Central Plains had regained contact with them, those who had entered the northern territory were like clay oxen entering the sea. It was as if they had disappeared directly. Given the barbarians' character of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, even if they had not personally experienced the battle with the northern frontier army, they would still realize that the so-called information about the northern frontier being weak was all fabricated by the Xinwu dynasty to deceive them. The one who was truly weak was the Xinwu dynasty. However, now that things had developed to this point, the Mirror Frost dynasty did not have the spare energy to cause trouble for the Xinwu dynasty for the time being. After all, their brothers, as well as the 13th prince, whom the Khan had placed all his hopes on, were all trapped in the north. If this matter was not handled properly, the Mirror Frost Khan would be enraged, and countless heads would roll. Both sides had merely set up a battle formation and were facing each other. Unexpectedly, neither side had any intention of taking the initiative to attack. The first day slowly passed by in this kind of stalemate between wanting to say something but hesitating to do so. It was not until noon of the second day that a rider came out of the Shuangjin dynasty's military tent, claiming to be the messenger of the Khan of Frost. Li Zhongxing's camp was built behind the cement wall. Because the fortification had just begun construction, even with the help of cement, it was impossible to complete it in a short period of time. Moreover, this fortification was only outside Donglin City and had not yet been connected to the planned cities. Naturally, the Shuangjian barbarian did not know that this was the wall of despair that they would encounter in the future. It was just a temporary fortification built by the Northern Frontier Army. The ranger in charge of guarding the place held the so-called messenger on the ground and carefully searched him. After making sure that he did not carry any weapons, he was escorted into the main camp to meet with Li Zhongxing. After entering the commander's tent, the messenger did not mock Li Zhongxing with a sneer on his face. Instead, he cupped his fist with a solemn face and said in a deep voice, "I am Ke Ting, the young chief of the Green Carp tribe in the Frost Mirror Grassland. Greetings to all the generals." The moment his voice fell, all the generals in the commander's tent looked at each other in dismay. Then, their eyes fell on Li Zhongxing's face at the same time. It was said that the Shuangjin barbarian was rude and unreasonable. But now, this messenger had changed his usual behavior. There must be something fishy going on. "I am Li Zhongxing, the commander of the southern expedition in the northern frontier." Li Zhongxing sat on the tiger-skin chair, looked down at Ke Teng and said in a deep voice, "The Shuangjian dynasty started the war without declaring war. First, they attacked our northern frontier territory. Now that the army is here again, the young chief has changed his usual behavior. This is really confusing." Hearing this, Ke Teng blushed. He cleared his throat and said, "There is something you don't know, Marshal Li. Our Shuangjian dynasty was deceived by a scoundrel. We didn't know that the northern frontier and the Shenwu dynasty had broken off relations. That's why we attacked the northern frontier territory. I'm sure you also know that our Shuangjian dynasty and the Shenwu dynasty have been at war for more than half a year. When we suddenly saw a hole in our border, we naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity." Ke Teng's words weren't nonsense. After all, the northern frontier belonged to the Shenwu dynasty. Although the Frost Mirror barbarian clearly came for the northern frontier, they didn't penetrate the northern frontier, let alone enter the territory of the northern frontier. In addition, the Frost Mirror barbarian had come for the Central Plains. So, if they braced themselves and said that they came to attack the Shenwu dynasty, no one could say anything about it. "Oh!" Li Zhongxing suddenly understood and raised his head. He smiled and said, "Young chief means that you attacked the wrong people?" Yes, that's what I meant." Ke Teng's face was still red, but it wasn't clear whether it was due to excitement or embarrassment. Li Zhongxing's face suddenly darkened. He said in a strange tone, "Young chief is so sure of this statement. Do you think that I and everyone else are fools? If our northern frontier army entered the Shuangjian dynasty and killed, and then we told you that we were actually going for the demon beasts in the Hengduan mountain range, would you believe us?" As soon as he finished speaking, the generals in the tent suddenly burst into laughter. Ke Teng's face became even redder. After all, they had all watched the Shuangjian barbarian invade the north. They didn't even look at them, who were disguised as the Shenwu dynasty's troops, and directly rushed to the northern frontier. If the Shuangjian dynasty really came for the Shenwu dynasty, how could they let go of the cities and troops in the north? Donglin City was intact, and they were unharmed. This was a ruthless slap to the Shuangjian dynasty's face. This is not the same. Ke Teng's face alternated between green and red. He whispered, "Your northern frontier army can directly enter the Hengduan mountain range. Why do you need to use our Frost Mirror grassland?" Li Zhongxing smiled and shook his head. He mocked, "Then why can't your Frost Mirror cavalry gather their forces and directly attack the Central Plains and take over the imperial capital? Why do you have to divide your forces to attack our northern frontier territory? You can divide your forces, but can't we?" Ke Teng's chest rose and fell violently. He stared fiercely at Li Zhongxing, but he couldn't spit out a single word. In terms of sharp tongues, even 100 of him wouldn't be a match for these people. But now he had to lower his head. Chapter 505. You're being bullied to this extent and you're still not angry? As Li Zhongxing mocked Kei Yan, his eyes flashed with a sharp light as he began to secretly plan. The Shuangjian dynasty hasn't changed much, but they also have experts on their side. They know that Lei Qiusheng wants to use them to clean up the families and sects of the Shenwu dynasty and suppress us at the same time. When the matter is almost done, Lei Qiusheng will make his move. At that time, those Shuangjian barbarian in the south of the Shenwu dynasty won't be able to come out. Therefore, they can only set their sights on the northern frontier, hoping to liberate their forces from our side and ensure that the Shuangjian dynasty won't be greatly damaged by Lei Qiusheng's scheme. After all, after this matter is over, many forces will want a share of the profits. Suddenly, Lin Yuan's voice interrupted Li Zhongxing's contemplation. Li Zhongxing looked around and didn't see any signs of Lin Yuan's existence. He then heard Lin Yuan say, "I'm talking directly to you through my consciousness, so only you can hear my voice. You don't need to find out where I am. Just deal with the matter at hand and try to stall for time. Wait for our people to kill the Frost Mirror Barbarian in the northern frontier, but don't deliberately cause a conflict." With Lin Yuan's support, Li Zhongxing's thoughts inexplicably calmed down. Clearing his throat, Li Zhongxing said with a smile, "Young clan leader, you don't need to take it to heart. I'm just complaining. If it were you, young clan leader, you wouldn't easily swallow this resentment after being beaten up for no reason, right?" "Yes, I don't know what request Commander Li has. Please tell us. The Shuangjian dynasty will do our best to satisfy you." Seeing that Li Zhongxing was giving him a way out, even though Kei Teng had been humiliated to the point of wanting to die, he had no choice but to pinch his nose and agree. However, this time, Kei Teng emphasized the words reflection of the Frost dynasty. He wanted to remind Li Zhongxing that he was not alone. There were still millions of reflection of the Frost cavalry outside. If the two sides could not come to an agreement, they would have to fight. If the two of them had a normal conversation, Li Zhongxing might have to think twice before bargaining. However, with Lin Yuan's support, Li Zhongxing no longer had any desire to negotiate. This was because Lin Yuan never intended to give him any face from the beginning. In the end, they would still have to fight. After pondering for a moment, Li Zhongxing's lips curled up slightly. He smiled and said, "Young clan leader, you're too polite. I'm just a commander. Even if I want to negotiate, I'm not qualified. How about this? Young clan leader, go back and rest for 2 days. I'll quickly send a letter to the Northern Frontier Mansion and let the king of the Northern Frontier count the casualties before coming back to talk to young clan leader." Although Kei Yan was smiling, he was cursing in his heart. Of course, he knew that Li Zhongxing's rank wasn't high enough to negotiate with them. However, as one of the 3 commanders of the Northern Frontier, Li Zhongxing's words still carried a certain amount of weight on the Northern Frontier. More importantly, Li Zhongxing and his men were currently at the pass. As long as he didn't agree, his brothers trapped in the north wouldn't be able to come out. They wouldn't even be able to send in supplies. Who knew how many people would die in these 2 days? Licking his lips, Kei Yan asked tentatively, "Commander Li, I came here with sincerity. However, I don't see any sincerity from your side. How about you open a path and let the warriors of the Shuangjian dynasty who mistakenly entered the northern frontier return home?" Almost instantly, Li Zhongxing heard 2 cold snorts. One voice came from Lin Yuan, and the other voice came from a middle-aged scholar in a gray robe in the tent. The middle-aged scholar cupped his fists toward Li Zhongxing, then looked at Kei Yan with a gloomy face and said in a cold voice, "Warriors? Those barbarians may seem like warriors to you, but in the eyes of the northern frontier, they are complete sinners. This young master, your Shuangjian dynasty wantonly invaded our northern frontier, committing all kinds of crimes. Now that you see that the situation isn't right, you send someone over to say a few words and want us to let them go? Isn't the price of invading our northern frontier a little too low?" "You are?" The corners of Kei Yan's mouth twitched as he gloomily stared at the middle-aged scholar. After all, Li Zhongxing's army was blocking the path that they had to pass through. No matter what, he was a mountain that could not be bypassed. The Shuangjian dynasty did not want to waste their military power in such a meaningless place, so they naturally had to say all they could. However, if it was someone else who came to talk to him, he would not be so good-tempered. If it were not for the fact that this middle-aged scholar was Li Zhongxing's subordinate, he would have already brandished his blade and cut him down. Chen family of Taicang, Chen Zifeng. The middle-aged scholar coldly stared back at Kei Yan without the slightest hint of panic in his eyes. Chen Zifeng was a traitor on the side of the aristocratic families during the rebellion of the Three Cities. He might not be first-rate in terms of cultivation or strategy, but his insight was unparalleled. From the moment the northern frontier prince's residents began to carry out military orders, he understood one thing. Lin Yuan had no intention of letting go of the Shuangjian dynasty's cavalry that had entered the northern frontier. In other words, Lin Yuan's original intention was to completely fall out with the Shuangjian dynasty. With such a style, either Lin Yuan was not worried about the Shuangjian dynasty's revenge, or he had something that could threaten the Shuangjian dynasty. Coupled with Li Zhongxing's current attitude, how could Chen Zifeng, who had already seen through everything, not jump out and make his presence known in the eyes of the Dragon King? Never heard of you. But then again, you don't have the right to talk to me. Kei Yan disdainfully shook his head and sneered. Do you think that the Shuangjian dynasty is weak and easy to bully just because I say a few words? Do you really want us to break into this weak camp of yours and hold our swords to your necks before you're willing to talk? The Shuangjian dynasty's soldiers were used to being rude and rude. After Kei Yan finished speaking, he felt that he had finally vented the anger in his heart. Especially after he finished speaking, the generals in the tent no longer dared to say anything else, especially the more timid ones. At this moment, a thin layer of cold sweat had even seeped out of their foreheads. Seeing this scene, Kei Yan felt even more confident. After all, not wanting to lose manpower was one thing. The main reason the Shuangjian dynasty's army was willing to stop and negotiate with Li Zhongxing was because this army was at its peak and had an oppressive aura. Once the two sides started fighting, the Shuangjian dynasty's army might not be able to gain much of an advantage. But now, he realized that although the soldiers below were full of fighting spirit, the generals who made the decision might not have the courage to fight to the death with the Shuangjian dynasty. Clang. Before Kei Yan could feel smug for long, Li Zhongxing stood up from his tiger-skin chair and drew his personal guard saber. He walked over to Kei Yan with a majestic gait, his eyes blooming with killing intent. Since young clan leader has said so, then let's talk after we fight. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.